Introduction to Ember.js. And we're off to a great start already. Stop it. All right, what is Ember.js? Besides awesome, as Matt already talked about. So I classify Ember.js as being what I've coined as being the next generation of frameworks, of which I think there's only three. There's Backbone, Angular, and Ember. And of those three, as Matt already alluded to, I think Ember is above the other two by far. You can do in Angular and Backbone, you can write JavaScript applications, single-page applications, and you can accomplish the same thing like you can in Ember. But as Matt was alluding to, Ember gives it to you out of the box, whereas, and it's a working solution out of the box. Whereas with Angular and Backbone, you can have something that works, but you're left a little bit more to yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially if that's the flexibility that you need. Which leads into this next part, which is, well, actually, we skipped to the third bullet point. Ember is very opinionated. In order to get it out of the box and have it working, you have to do things their way. You have to agree with their concepts. You have to understand their naming conventions. You have to understand what they're expecting out of your application and how they want you to work with it. And if you're in alignment with all of those, then you're going to love it and have no problems. And you can stand an app up very quickly, and it's awesome. If you don't agree with any of those for whatever reason, or you're in a situation where you can't agree with those for, again, whatever situation, then Angular or Backbone is certainly something that will help you get the job done as well. But of the three, I certainly would recommend Ember. But again, I consider all of these to be considered like the next generation framework. Like I said earlier, I came from Dojo. And I was using Dojo, over jQuery or Prototype or any of these other ones because it was more of a toolkit to let you build applications. But it was for a different time. It was not, you could make a single page app happen, but you had to wire up the back end. You had to manage user state. You had to manage bindings. And they had some things that could help you with that, but they didn't have the concept of routers, and they didn't have controllers. I mean, they sort of did. Like everything they had was sort of, kind of. And I just kept fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And I was like, all right, this is ridiculous. I can either burn more time trying to figure out how to make Dojo do what I want to do, or it's time for me to reevaluate what's out in the marketplace. And I looked at Angular, looked at Backbone, and looked at Ember. And I was like, oh, this isn't even discussion moved with Ember. I've been using it since the 0.4 alpha days, so almost 2 years ago when you were insane to use it. And I've been riding the Ember wave ever since. It is so much more stable now. It's at 1.61, I think is the actual stable release at the moment. We're running beta 1.7, well, we're running 1.7.1, we upgraded 1.7.4 because we want the query parameters capabilities inside of it. But we had rolled those in way back when, even though they weren't in there yet because we needed them. So Ember is a framework for creating ambitious web applications. It will let you build an application. It will take care of event binding for you, page management, resource management, models, all kinds of things. We're going to see all those things. But it's not to say, I've got a web page, oh, hey, I need to go make a little AJAX call and show some data, or I need to update this color when somebody mouses over. That's what you use jQuery for, or just raw JavaScript or anything else. This is to build an actual application. It's akin to building a desktop application in any like the Windows libraries. If you're using like, and I'm going to date myself, it's been a while, like the Windows presentation framework and that kind of stuff, which I'm sure has been replaced. But the idea is that you're building an actual full-fledged application with a lot of user state and long running. That's what Ember can give you out of the box. Built for productivity, again, opinionated. So we're going to go over what those opinions are. If you don't agree with them, and there's nothing wrong with that, you're going to have a harder going in Ember than if you do agree with them. So I'm not saying you have to drink the Kool-Aid, but the Kool-Aid tastes great. So it is sometimes perceived as difficult to learn, partly because of the opinionation, and partly because it is just a little bit difficult to learn. So this is your average learning curve for anything. In this case, it could be Backbone, it could be Angular. It's not drawn to scale. But the idea is that, hey, I can just get something off the box, out of going, this is my hello world, I start, I'm going, oh, I gotta do something else, great, I learn a little bit more, I gotta do something else, learn a little bit more, that kind of thing. This is Ember's learning curve. Holy cow, what did I just do? I finally understand it, and that's it. Once you've understood their opinions, and you understand the concepts, which we're gonna talk about here in a few moments, once you hit this point, again, not drawn to scale, but once you hit this point, that's it. There's no more learning. The same pattern that works for Ember's hello world works for a ridiculously large application. There's one set of patterns. That's how you do it. So again, a little bit of, you got to take that in context with it.
And how much of whatever you said, this naming, actually gets rolled out that way for deployment?
As far as like naming conventions? All of it. Like so, and we're going to get into it more, but instead of having a file that might have a function in it, and then you say, oh, well, this is the name of my function, and now I'm somehow going to expose that to the rest of my code. Either I'm going to export it as like an AMD module, or I'm going to include this file somehow and get access to it. I'm going to throw it in a global namespace. It very much says, well, name a file this and put it in a folder called routes. Now that's your router called that. So it expects things to be called something in a certain location. But it makes sense, and again, you'll see it, because it's just well organized. Where I find that most people's argument is against this isn't that they don't want opinions or they don't want structure. They just don't want this structure. Well, why do they call it that? It should have an S on the end. Why is it capital? Well, I don't know about views. Maybe it should be called view layer. It's like, if what we're discussing is the name of the folder, but you bind everything else, just deal with it for a little bit, see how you like it, and I guarantee you, you're going to forget what it was called because you're not going to be messing with it anymore because you're writing an application. You're dealing with this and not the underlying stuff that you're normally having to do if you're trying to write an equivalent application in jQuery. You can do it in jQuery. I mean, this is obviously raw JavaScript, but you're having to wire up a bunch of things and create event managers and observers and all these patterns that come out of the box. So those do go out the door like that. But what ends up happening, we'll talk about it in a compilation step, is the names don't matter at that point because of how they get registered. And so we'll look at that. All right, so there's several core concepts in Ember that if you understand them, make your development life so much more simple. These concepts are not limited to, but these are the primary ones. Models, routes, templates, views, controllers, and components. Most of these should sound familiar if you've had any experience with an MVC framework, model, view, controller, whether it be on the server side or client, Angular, Backbone, again, same concepts. We're going to go through and talk about each of these. A few of these words have slightly different meanings in the Ember ecosystem than you might expect them to. So again, it's making that connection between what Ember means by it and what it's really doing. And once you make that connection, it makes everything easier, etc. So we're just going to go through these. All right, so a model is just an object that stores persistent state. Excuse me. So the idea here is that if you want to be able to take data that's in your application and store it off somewhere, or you have data that is stored off somewhere and you want to use it in your application, it is represented through an object referred to as a model. It's just a JavaScript object, but the concept is a model. We're going to talk about templates a little bit later, but how you get that data in the model out to the user to see is through templates, because templates are responsible for displaying that data. And the templates is where your HTML is, and we're going to get to templates in a moment. In many of your Ember applications, models are just going to be loaded via an HTTP JSON API. However, you can give Ember its data to its models any way you want. It's just JavaScript. So this is the normal way. There's a bunch of different ways. The live coding demo we're going to look at, we use just raw JavaScript and arrays to populate our models because, again, they're just objects. There is a library out there called Ember Data. It's a companion library to the Ember framework. You do not have to use Ember Data to use Ember. A lot of people do. It gives you an out-of-the-box persistency, if that's even a word, but I'm going with it, between your JavaScript object models and back-end persistent storage. They also have an adapter for local storage, etc. There's other data projects out there. There's Ember Model, there's Ember RESTful, Ember REST, I forget what it's called. There's EPF. We wrote our own because nothing quite did what we wanted for our own use, so we wrote our own. It's called, conveniently enough, SL Model for software. It does everything we need it to do. The point being, you don't have to worry about any of those. You truly can just do straight up this. And tonight's demo, we're not even going to do JSON calls, or HTTP calls. We're doing it just right there in the models. All right, routes. So inside of an Ember application, routes are the URL representations of your application's objects. And it tells the template which model to display. So in this example, if you had a cars URL, it tells it to render a collection of cars. It can get more complicated than that, but this is what it does right out of the box for you. It queries the model, makes it available in the controllers and the templates. So the router is saying, what's the state of my application? I'm going to go get the data that goes with that. I'm going to go tell the templates that go with that to display to the user. And then as the templates or models being shown to the users change, the URL is automatically kept up to date. So there's a two-way relationship with the URL. Initially, when you put in a URL, you can load the Ember application into a specific state based off the URL saying, I want these models, meaning I want this data, I want these templates. But then, once that's going on, if you have other actions going on, when you hit a button and you move somewhere else, you're then telling the application to change state. When it changes state, the last thing it does after it does all of its rendering is say, what state is my application in, represent that as a URL, and put that in the browser. So you can start with that and have the state represent where you started with the URL, or you can change your application state and have the URL be a representative of that. That's important to remember as you're loading models and moving back and forth, but there's also something you can do with an Ember application. We're going to do it as a full, it's a single page app. It is, like when you go to the URL, it is the application. But it is possible to load an Ember application into just a div on a page. So you could be on a normal website and then load an Ember application, and you can load another Ember app and another Ember app. Well, none of those are going out to the URL. They still have this concept inside because the router is keeping track of internal objects or the application state, but it's not going to represent itself out to the address bar if that's how you're loading it. So again, the URL, even though that's what you type in to get to a web page, that's what we've been training for the last 20 years of web use, and that is still correct. You can initialize your application state at a URL. Think of it more like this. The URL is just visual eye candy to represent the state of the application. The URL is not necessary for your application to work correctly. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right. Well, we pretty much already hit on that. It's because it can load the individual state. You can give the URL to your application, and it would know, oh, I want to load these posts, these comments for this user, whatever you have in the URL, and it can immediately take your application into the correct state. So a lot of single-page apps that you saw, several years ago when that concept was still going on, you could get navigated into somewhere and be like, this is awesome, and you send that link to your buddy, and they just load up that first page of the application, and they're like, well, this kind of blows. What did you send me? You're like, no, you're not seeing this. It's like, you gotta click here, and then here, and there, and this. And they're like, yeah, I'm over that. This takes you right to that application initialization. All right, along with the routes, you can set properties in your controllers, which we're going to talk about what those are. You can execute events and actions. You can connect a particular template to a particular controller. So remember when I said you went to /cars, it's going to load a collection of cars. That's the easy way out of the box. You could also say when I load, like let's say dashboard, you can actually say on this dashboard, I want to load this template with this data, and I want to load that template with this data, and that template with this data. So there's one URL concept, but it's doing multiple template and data things. You can do that as well. That's you do all this in the routes. All right, so the template. This is the HTML of your application. This is what you normally are used to writing, as you're doing web applications. This is what the user sees and interacts with. Each template is going to be backed by a model. It gets its data from the controller, and if the model ever changes, the template will automatically change as well, out of the box. Again, you can break that, but out of the box, if we're showing a list of users, and we go add a new user to the user model, or add a new user model to the collection of users, to be very specific, then the list of users would automatically just have one added. There's automatic live binding going on out of the box, which we're going to see examples of and talk about. That's accomplished using the handlebars templating language. So again, this goes back to that opinion. It is possible to use Ember without handlebars. Unless you have a lot of free time or you have a very specific business reason you have to do that, don't. Because you're just going to have to recreate a lot of things. But it goes back to that opinion. A lot of people are like, oh, I just don't like handlebars as a templating engine. All right, it's possible to use Ember without it. But out of the box, you get all these things without having to do any extra work. You can include other templates. You can do if-else logic, with, without, all those types of things. You can do loops. You can do formatting helpers on your data. Your expressions, this is how you get your data out of your templates. So you can say, I want the first name off my model, show it here. Those little airplane brackets on each side, that's just handlebar syntax. These are just JavaScript files, or I take it back. They're text files with a handlebars extension, and they can process via JavaScript. Outlets are where you can tell other data to be rendered. So when we're talking about that dashboard, you could have, this is my users outlet, this is my, stats outlet and something else, you can tell your data to render into these outlets on the page. The same concept as like a yield or, I'm trying to think of another one from another library, but you get the concept there. You can also do components inside of your templates, which we're going to touch on a little bit as well. They let you create reusable functionality that you can just drop into your application. And when we get to components, I'll touch on a key point, and you got to keep in mind on this one too, because they blur the lines a little bit in the definition.
Are outlets then something that would be really common anytime you have anything that's very complex? That's how you break things up? Is it a common decomposition method or?
It can be. There's like two ways to do it.
You can have an entire application that just has one outlet.
Okay.
That everything gets rendered into that same outlet. But usually, I mean, like if you have a sidebar that is always displaying something, and then like the rest of your application is kind of updating, you might have two outlets, one for the sidebar and one for your main application up there.
Gotcha.
Well, another thing too that outlets are used for is if you've got a route that's nested or that's got separate like pads on the end. The outlet is how you basically say like trying to think of an example, but the outlet is also where any of those. So if you have a route that has multiple segments to it, it's going to start at the first one. It's going to render any page you have for that one, and if it's got an outlet, that's where it's going to then render the next segment. It's going to go into that outlet and render it there. So
it's like, so when you say like cars, Ford, or when you say Ford trucks, F-150, and as what Josh was talking about, as those go, it would just say, oh, this one goes into that outlet. Now that I'm here, oh, I've got more stuff. If that has an outlet, that's where that's
going. Yeah, you
going.
have a Ford page that says here's an outlet where whatever the specific model gets rendered, but this page is just where the maker and all of that content is.
So out of the box, the way Ember expects you to organize your application, just out of the box, is exactly what Josh was talking about with that nesting. So the idea is that if I keep navigating, oh, hey, I just click on this and I want to see that, and I click on it, that I still want to see the other data. And the URL is just getting longer.
See the previous choices.
Yeah, exactly, and it's all there. And that's perfectly fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't work for every application. At which point, then what Matt was talking about, like in the application we've written, we have 2 outlets maybe, and I think a yield somewhere in a component. Like, we don't use them because our data doesn't organize that way. We have a dashboard, and it's very particular what you're doing in that dashboard. You're either on an overview, or you're on the tickets, or you're on the devices, or you're on this thing. We don't have nested hierarchy in the way that Ember gives you out of the box.
Gotcha.
So we change our routes, and instead we say, hey, controller, you've got this data, you've got that data, you've got that data, render these templates. We do a lot of it in the route and not through the nested route out of the box.
Do outlets share the same route and or controller, or do they have their own unique corresponding one?
Out of the box, they have their own, if you
Okay.
follow the nested hierarchy, because
Okay.
each nest would have its own level of control.
Okay.
But that's easily changed, like very
Gotcha.
easily. Like you might change it and not even realize you changed it. It's so easy to change it.
Cool. Thank you.
I don't know if you have, yeah.
Can we keep templates in separate files?
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna go over that, but yes, absolutely. I recommend you do that, but it takes an extra step, which isn't really a big deal, but it depends on your background, depends on your environment, that kind of thing. But we're gonna look at both ways.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so views. So, well, we'll go through this, and then I'll free associate as I go. So they represent the visual parts of your application the user can see in the browser. Sounds very much like a template, but it's not. You do not have to have a view. Ember is all about the models, the templates, and a route. Views are ancillary. So you do not have to have a view. Anything you don't specify, which we're going to look at, gets created for you behind the scenes. So every route is going to have a controller and a view and a template. But if you didn't specifically define one, it gives you a default one, because that's how it needs to work. So it creates one. So if you want to define one, you can, but it's not required. These can handle events or custom interactions that are possible to manage with the templates. Did insert element as a hook. So basically, if you need more functionality in your template, you start creating a view and putting it here. So now you can react to click events, key press events. You can create custom elements. You can put custom logic in here. there is a did insert element hook. So that way you can say, now that that element has been inserted into the DOM, I now have reference to it. So now I can run jQuery code against that actual element reference in case I want to do a focus on it or I want to do something else. There's also will insert element, which says I've rendered it all. I've prepared all the node tree, but I have not inserted it into the DOM yet. Now is your chance to make changes to it without it jumping around on the screen to the user, that kind of stuff. There's also a will destroy element. I use that so infrequently. In case you want to tear something down, like you had an event listener running that was outside of the Ember ecosystem, or you wanted to learn something else, or whatever. So the point is, you don't need a view. But if you want to start doing more things than just simple display logic that your template's capable of, the view is where you do all that. And then there's a relationship between the template and the controller and the route that knows how to run it. And then this is very important. When you start wanting to create reusable code, be careful because components are different. When you want to start reusing code, you can start putting them in here, such as modals, or you want to react to different things, that kind of stuff. So that's what a view is. All right, controllers. We have several slides about controllers because they are very important. All right, these are objects that store application state. So remember, models were objects that store data, usually to be persisted somewhere. Controllers are objects that store application state. The route is going to set a model on that. Again, remember, this is out of the box. You can change this. There are cases where you want to change this. But out of the box, this is how Ember just works conceptually. It's going to act as a bridge between your model and the viewer of the template. When your template says, airplane bracket, first name, it's first going to look at the controller to see if there's a property there called first name, and then it's going to go on to the model. So even though we said before a template gets its data from the model, which is true, it is possible for the controller to intercept that. It can change it. If you define something here, it's never going to go to the model. Likewise, you can add new properties on the controller and access them from the template, and it won't go to the model either. And we'll see examples of those when we do the live code. If you don't tell it what type you want or that you want one at all, you still get one for free. It's part of the Ember magic. There's always a controller, there's always a view, there's always a template. You have to have a template, unless you specifically tell it a different way. But views and controllers do not have to create. So the point is, on disk, you don't have to have a bunch of empty files if you don't have anything extra you want to declare. Components. So these are views, but they're completely isolated. So if you have, we're talking before in the template where if I wanted to capture the click event, I wanted to bubble up to the view and I'm going to do something on it. In a component, when you capture the click event, it's not leaving that component. It's not going to go to the view that holds it on that page. It's completely self-contained. Great way to build reusable components for your applications. Okay, so Ember's opinionated. Has anybody heard or followed the concept of web components in browsers? Not just Ember, but browsers, W3C, web components. All right, so the idea behind web components in the browser is that I should be able to create a custom tag. I should be able to call it soft layer calendar and describe the HTML that goes with it, the CSS that goes with it, and the JavaScript that goes with it. So when I serve that from my server in a web page, and the user's browser sees that tag, it says, oh, I have all the things that go along with how to make this tag, and I can create a new component for the user. And it's isolated. So my CSS and my JavaScript are not going to bleed out and affect anything else on the page, and nobody else's JavaScript or CSS is going to bleed in and affect my component as well. Now there are ways to make them talk. You have to go, you have to do that yourself. But that's the idea. I should be able to create a custom tag that I drop in my HTML, give the browser instructions on how to render it, and voila, all this magic happens. Those are web components. So Ember took that same idea, put them in here, called them components, don't let them talk to the application, but you really want them to a lot of times. So we pretty much view components as they're widgets that are limited because they can't talk to the rest of the ecosystem, but they're not components because they have nothing to do with custom tags. They've kind of mixed these concepts together. Part of that, I suspect, is because Unicats is on the same W3C advisory board that's making the web components spec. So, kudos. I mean, powerful, you just have to understand the limitation. Mentally, for a while, I thought of these as reusable widgets. That's how you use them. But they're too isolated to be used that way. They act more like web components. But in a Ember application, a web component's kind of useless.
Will you have an example of one of these?
We can, yeah. I don't have one specifically, but it's very easy to do.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, again, it's just talking about concept, just keeping that in mind. Because that has bitten us several times. It's just, both solutions are 90% of what you want. And we're just like, there's a piece missing. All right, so you might have seen in Josh's, that long introduction thing. I appropriated it for myself, appropriate attribution. So this is a diagram that kind of describes what we just talked about from the concepts. So you've got the route that's going to load your model. It's also then going to set that model on your controller. Your controller sets your state on your view and your templates, which renders, and that's kind of the related circle, or a triangle, or whatever shape that is, between all of these concepts. Any questions about any of that? We have more, but any questions?
Which is true universally, right? It doesn't. This is not an Ember specific thing. This is universally. Is that?
If it's MVC,
okay.
yes. I mean, that's the theory behind it, yes. This is a very common pattern.
It's not exactly. Angular's close, but it's not
Exactly. It's you've got to put air quotes around MVC.
Gotcha.
It's MV star, right?
Yeah. It's with a little bit of Ember.
Cool.
Yeah. Because you'll find as you're writing an application, we'll see this more later, you'll end up putting a lot of your logic here and not here. Routers act more like controllers in your typical MVC than they do a router. But then again, routers are kind of a new concept in MVC. Like they're ambiguous depending on which framework you're using. Let's take, I'm PHP, so I can, off the top of my head, in like Zen framework, there's a front controller that acts like your router, but it's a controller by name, but it truly has router things it does versus MV dash with air quotes around it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you'll find that a lot of your business, this decorates your data. This controls your application.
Which is the opposite from Angular,
Yes.
where the route just sends you to your controllers, which do all your work for you.
So it's an important distinction to know, especially if you're coming from one or the other, or you have a traditional MVC. Again, what's traditional? But if you have a traditional MVC description in your mind, because when I first started, like I said 2 years ago, I mean, they didn't even have the router when I started. So everything was in here. And now you really are very route heavy and controller lighter, which makes perfect sense, but making that mental shift, you're just constantly running into it until it makes sense. The learning curve is like this, and then flat.
Could you give a simple example of what would you do in a router versus a controller?
Well, this is going to set your application state. So if you go to a dashboard route, you might look up the model, and you're going to set data on this controller, and set it on that controller, and set data on this controller, and then you're going to say, okay, now I'm on my dashboard. If a user clicks anywhere, I want all those click events to go up to this route, and I'm going to react to it. Instead of saying, I want to handle them here or here, you want, a lot of things end up at your route. Anything that's shared across your application, you're going to, anything that's universal action, logging out, those types of things, like they belong to your application, not your controller. The controller says, I'm going to take I have a request to display a property. I'm going to proxy that out to my model. Because it's going through me, if I want to change it, I can. If I want to change state or maintain state, because again, these are applications, or these are the state of your data, of your application on a case-by-case basis. If I have something here where I'm toggling saying, hide this, show this, well, I would put that here, the hide, show, because it doesn't belong in the model. That belongs, on your view or your controller, predominantly in your controller, trying to share it out to other controllers. If it truly is just view, 100% view, and it doesn't need to be shared with any other template, then you can put it here. a good rule of thumb is always put things in the lowest place that they need to be shared. So if templates don't ever need to share anything with their other templates or views, because these are kind of mushed together, then you can put it here. But if you want a user controller that's showing a user list, that when I toggle something, it turns on or off an availability controller and its data, well, now I'm going to put it on the controller because this controller can talk to the other controller, but the entire application doesn't need it. So we'll see it more in the live code demo. All right, so a few more slides about controllers because they are so important in Ember, conceptually. All right, they decorate your models with display logic. It's really, that's their job. They also hold on to the application state, like we talked about before. So your models, again, typically have data on them, properties that are persisted somewhere to, let's say, a server, whereas your controller is going to hold on to properties that are important to the way your application is running, but they don't get persistent. So again, they're toggling a state. Is this happening? Is this not happening? The user wanted to filter or show this, or they wanted to collapse something. And again, those lines, as I was just describing, that can get a little bit blurred between the view. It works better with a code example, which we have. And then we already talked about this. When a template references a property, if it's on the controller, it never goes to the model. And if it's not on the controller, then it'll go onto the model. That's out of the box. You can change that. You can get fancy. You can say, oh, I know I've got one, but I want to check something else first. Oh, I don't already have this thing. Now we'll give it off the model and return it to the user. I mean, it's easy enough to do an if-else, those kinds of things. But it's going to check here first. When we say properties, the properties could also be functions. They work interchangeably inside of Ember very easily. How it works out of the box. Again, we'll show examples. All right, so there's three different types of controllers. If you just have a controller, then it's just a value store. So maybe you're storing authentication state on the user, or you're storing some sort of, they have this hidden and they have this shown. You truly can you have a controller and it just stores values and properties. That's the concept behind it. It doesn't do much. Again, it's as powerful as you build it, but just out of the box, it's just a value store. An object controller is going to represent a single model. So this would say that I have a user object, or excuse me, a user controller that's representing a user model, because I only have one user logged in at the moment, in the example I'm describing at the moment. Whereas an array controller is going to represent an array of models. So I could have a cars array controller, and it's going to have multiple car models as its content. So three different types of controllers. If you don't specifically define a controller, then Ember is going to automatically create one for you. And it's going to look at the data that came back from its model hook in the route, and then it's going to decide what kind of controller you're going to get. So if it returns an object, you're going to get an object controller. If it returns an array, then you're going to get an array controller. And if it doesn't return anything, then you get Ember controller. So remember, if you don't have a need to specifically create a controller, because you're not adding any additional logic, one still gets created for you. And in the case of controllers, a decision is made as to which one, because there's three different types. A view's a view, there's no other type of view. Controllers, there's three.
So in that case, if you don't create a controller, it gets from the model and creates a controller for you, since Ember's going to check the controller first for that data, is it not going to go back to the model again since it's already created it on this?
No, it'll go to the model, because what will happen, because it's a single page app, so the very first time that route's hit, it's going to do, assuming this is how you have it set up, the route's going to go make the request to get your models. It comes back, and it's going to say, am I a single object, am I an array of objects? I'm going to be either an object controller or an array controller. And then that's what it creates. So then, when the template looks for its data, it'll pass through that controller, and in this case, there'll never be anything set, because it's auto-created.
It's just been created an entity.
Exactly, so it's just going to always proxy through it.
Gotcha.
And it'll set the controller will have a model property.
Correct.
It's set with, okay.
Now, if you wanted to go and add a function or a property to this controller, you're going to have to go create it on disk. This is an in-memory creation. It's not like during build time where it says, oh, I've got all these routes that don't have explicit model files created. I'm going to create these files. These are in-memory, at execution time creation. Because, again, how Ember needs to hook things together is it needs to have somewhere for the model to be proxied to through a controller. So it creates all these in memory. So, you've had the application up and running for 5 weeks. you got a new feature you need to go add. You're like, oh, I know this needs to go on my car controller. Oh, I don't have a car controller. I need to go create one. Make sure when you create it, you make it an array controller or an object controller, because if you create the wrong type, then your app's not going to work, and you wonder why. Well, because Ember was automatically creating the right type for you, and you just told me something different. But we can see in the console, you can log all those active transitions, so you can see all the stuff it's creating for you. But again, that's not anything during like a build process. That's in-app creation at runtime. All right, so there's some naming conventions. This goes back to Ember being opinionated. So this is what's going to happen when your application boots. If you go load Ember and you say Ember, I don't remember how it starts, but it's so long. Application.create or something like that. You'll see why. I use tooling that just does it for me. It's been forever. But the point is, it's going to look for this file, and this file.
How does the application boot? Someone enters it in a URL?
Yes, when you go to a web page that contains an Ember application, you're going to include a reference to your source code, which should be a combination either in the same file or separate files, however you want to organize it. It's going to be the Ember library, most likely the jQuery library, although that dependency is being removed in soon to come version, as well as your application code. So it's just like jQuery. Like I need jQuery, and then here's the code that I wrote in jQuery. I need Ember, and I need my application that's written in Ember. So you're going to pull those files in on your web page, and then and I'll get you the exact syntax because I don't want to screw it out, but there's like an app.create something.
Just a little bit of JavaScript.
Yeah, it's like one line that fires up your application and starts the entire Ember application process. At which point it looks for these things, which you get out of the box. Like the hello world comes with this.
Okay, so let's back up.
Sure.
So the user isn't booting the application. The developer is booting the application.
Well, the user, by requesting a web page, gets HTML. That HTML contains JavaScript that has a line of code that says start up the Ember application. So the user doesn't have to do anything. They just have to go to the web page. So as a developer, if you don't put that startup line in your JavaScript code, it's not going to start. But there's nothing the user has to do other than just come visit you.
Yeah.
If you, so that's if you just hit the main, /URL of your Ember application. If you go to /favorites, then it's going to look for the favorites route, the favorites controller, and the favorites template. So remember how we got those auto-created controllers and the views and stuff for you? And I said views weren't needed, like they don't get auto-created unless, well, that's a corner case. This is the naming convention. There's a route called favorites route. There's a controller called favorites controller. Now this could be an array controller or an object controller. Again, it depends. And you're going to have a favorites template out of the box. So these, again, there's some naming conventions that they want you to follow. You can change them if you need to, but I stress only if you need to. Why incur additional headache? It is not worth it just to have a different name. If there's a legitimate need, by all means, but it's just drink the Kool-Aid, be happy, move on.
So is it not obvious where all the places you have to touch to get it right? Is that the peril?
No, it's just,
I get that you shouldn't fight it. I'm saying is it error prone when you do fight it?
I would say it's error prone when you do fight it because there's an awful lot of magic going on.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of magic going on in Ember. Now, I mean, you go read the source code, so magic's something, again, error codes.
Understood.
But out of the box, there's so much happening
Got it.
that you can go change one little thing, and there's 9 other things that need to be changed in concert. And as soon as that one breaks, you'll be like, now this error doesn't really make any sense. And then, like, unless you actually understand a big picture of it, I wouldn't say the first thing you should do, well, you shouldn't first download it and then go, I'm going to go change that. Get comfortable first. You can change it, but you're just asking for so much trouble because it does so much automatic generation of stuff for you. Getters and setters, things that are going on, and the way it handles namespacing inside, and resolutions. It has its own dependency injection container that registers names on. Now, granted, it's derived from what you called it, but it expects things to be in a certain pattern. And if you break that pattern, it doesn't know what to do.
So for the last line, does it really read a template named favorites?
Yes.
Favorite set.
Or a template with a data name of favorites inside your actual JavaScript. I'll show examples of both. But yes, there is a template called favorites. There's two different ways that you can create that template and store that template, but there is a template called favorites. All right, how do you organize your Ember application? Out of the box, when you pull it out, you are going to write your Ember application something like this. And this is what the Ember website talks about. This is the painful way, but we're going to go through it first. All right, so we've got our, we've got HTML, we've got body. I only had so much room. We've got our head. We're going to require our JavaScript libraries. This is where we pull in Ember. This is where we're going to pull in jQuery. This is where we're going to pull in handlebars. We're going to pull in, whatever the Ember application needs, and anything else your entire application needs. Maybe you need the moment library. Maybe you need, D3 charting, whatever. All right, so we pull all that in, right? All right, so here's my JavaScript up here. This is my Ember application. There's the line. That's how you start your Ember application. I knew it was simple. All right, so we're going to create an Ember application. Then I'm going to create my routes. So I've got my dashboard route, and then I'm registering that route with my router. Then I'm going to define my dashboard route, and then I'm going to define my controller, and then I'm going to continue and continue and continue and continue. I'm going to create all my controllers. I'm going to put all my views. I'm going to put my models. This is my Ember application right here. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. Where do my templates go? Well, I've got a single file, right? That's my application. I put my templates down here. Here's my script. I tell it it's let me back up. So this is my handlebars. This is by default the application. This is the outlet. This is where your app is going to render itself. It has no name because the default name is application. For subsequent templates, I'm going to name it. This is where it would say favorites or dashboard, and I would create all of my templates down here. Who wants to work at this? Get out. I was just waiting for something great. All right, so that's a single file. When you read the Ember website, they show snippets of code like, just put this, and put that. They show little pieces. They don't ever show one of these gigantic files, but they never explain how to not do it this way. You're going to want to not do it this way. So the other way that you can organize your application is to do multiple files and directories, which seems kind of sane. So in this particular case, we have a folder of controllers. You can ignore the git keeps. That comes from the Ember CLI tool. I just screen captured my project. So I've got an application controller, a cart controller, a products controller. We didn't really talk about helpers yet, but we have a currency helper. I got a products model. There's my routes. Here's some of my, I didn't expand components. These are my templates. So I've got my application template, my cart template, my product template, etc. Some sanity to the organization.
Does the user get all of this when he...
In this process, they end up with a single file that gets minified. So this is sanity for a developer. But to do this, it requires you to build your Ember application. Because Ember out of the box expects it to work, like this. This will work. And to get started and do hello world, there's nothing wrong with this. This works. You do not want to build a gigantic application with 20 developers and 500 active tickets. You will, I don't care how great Ember is, you'll kill yourself.
So is there a command that goes from the files to the one line?
So for this, so that right there, it requires you to build it into a single application file. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but basically you're going to want to use some build tools in the JavaScript world. You can use Brunch, Mimosa, Grunt, Broccoli. You can roll your own. I strongly recommend you use Ember CLI. So Ember CLI takes all of these different concepts and rolls them together into a tool that you can use to manage your application. And that's what I'm going to use tonight, so as you're seeing me do it. Keep in mind that the Ember code I'm writing could just as easily be in that single file, but I'm using a tool set to help me more rapidly develop. It allows me to, from the command line, I can generate these files, and it automatically puts it into this folder structure based off of a predetermined hierarchy. It also then, as part of that tooling of Ember CLI, it also gives me a server that it can serve off of through a proxy so I can see my development work and not have to put it somewhere on a live web server. I can also get, Josh talked about it earlier in the news, the Broccoli build tool is also used in there, and it's what goes through and builds all your source code. So it'll go through and say, okay, I'm going to go look at all of your templates, and I'm going to take all of those. It can run what's called a pre-compiler on them, so that way it's faster for execution when it gets to the user. Otherwise, once it gets to the user, they're going to have to do the compilation, so that way it can be referenced. That's a handlebars thing. We use SAS, or less. We're switching from SAS, my apologies. Anyway, so all of our styles that are in that styles folder, they're less files. As part of our Broccoli build process, it says look at that style folder, grab all my less, run it through a less pre-compiler. Now that I've got that output, what do you do next? Oh, that goes into the styles folder in my dist folder. There's a bunch of other things. Like it bundles all that stuff together for you. Again, you can use any of these tools, but the Ember community is predominantly organizing behind the Ember CLI tool.
And these tools can be used to go the other way.
To reverse
Take
engineer?
that application file and then split it out into these nice little files.
I haven't seen anything. I mean, anything's possible.
So
But that's not how these.
don't you lose your project source.
Oh, correct.
Well-
I would say if you use any of these, you should be using Git, so you don't lose your project source.
It generates an output, so it doesn't, it's just like building any compile time thing. You got your source and you run your build and it drops out a single file and puts it in public and stuff.
Right, but you come in, the application team has been let go.
Mhm.
They say, oh, we made a mistake. You get hired.
Mhm.
You get to see, you can see these production files, but you don't have
No, you have
access
the
to
source.
Yeah, you better hope there's source, or I would turn around and walk out.
Building it by itself, even if you're crazy enough to go without source control, building it itself is non-destructive to your source code. It's got a specific directory, it bundles everything up, wraps it in that single file format you just talking about,
Yeah.
and drops it into a place. And you can even set it up to where you tell it, like, if you're running
I understand, but in my hypothetical scenario,
It's both.
this
In your
has been
hypothetical scenario.
deployed
Yeah, you're
to
correct.
production.
And the source code's been
Application
lost.
teams were
Yeah.
let go.
Yeah,
Their laptops
Yeah.
and systems were
yeah.
reacquired and cleared.
Yeah, because what happens during this build process?
So you've come in to support the production applications, and all you have is the production deployed.
Yeah.
I mean,
if
it's no
that was
different
the
than-
case, you'd be in trouble.
It's no
Because-
different than any other language that has a production build. Like if you do a production build of any other
You can
tool.
reverse it.
Yeah, it's possible, but I wouldn't want to, because it takes all these files, concatenates them all together with some other pre-compilation, like there's multiple compile steps going on, puts it all together, then it minifies it, and obfuscates it. So what you get, if you got a lot of time, you can do anything. I would not want to. Like, yeah, if you don't have a source code, ask for a humongous raise or leave. Like, I would not want to tackle that. It would be, hopefully there's really good documentation and you can just recreate the entire application. That would be faster. Yeah, it's rewrite because everybody's got great documentation, right? It's like 100% documented. Right off the unit test, you create the harnesses for you. Yeah.
Another thing with CLI is that it's written and maintained by core team members. as part
Yes,
of
the Ember
So-
core team.
So if you
It's
want
very
to,
tight integration.
it's a good way to kind of like, if you're following what Ember CLI is doing, you're going to be in step with how development of Ember proper is going. If you use other tools, you may have to kind of bend and flex as changes come down the pipeline with Ember, whereas with Ember CLI, you're less likely to run into problems where all of a sudden Ember breaks Ember CLI, because that's kind of, it's almost like if you had to use Rails or something, it's kind of like you can do Rails new whatever, and it builds that whole, it builds that out for you.
Scaffolding or something.
Yeah, and it's not, it's so it's kind of like that, and it drops you off, and you've got this whole app, and you can start up your server and go in and look at your website, and you just go in and,
It
it's
creates all the
really like-
unit test files and stuff for you. Does not write them for you, but it does create the associated and required unit tests as well. So that we're like, oh yeah, I guess I should fill that out. And it also has the test runner built into it as well, so you just go to like the /test URL in the dev environment, and there they are, and you just run. And like, again, it's everything that you would eventually hope to achieve on your own. You could just npm install Ember CLI, Ember new project name, generate a controller, generate a view, generate whatever. You can write custom generators, and we'll get into more of those in other talks, and Matt talked about it a little bit last month as well, about Ember CLI.
If you've used Rails, then a lot of their paradigms and the way that they do things, if you've used Rails before, then you can kind of see where they're coming from. So there's a lot of overlap there. So it's kind of accessible to people that if they've got a Rails background.
And most like Angular backbone, et cetera, go through the same type of process. You can do it not built, but you're not gonna get very far before you're like, I've got to change this.
Does the build tool precompile the handlebar templates?
Yes. The build tool has a plugin that does all that. It's a complete tree plugin architecture. So,
What
yes.
about the YEO man generator for Ember? Have you guys looked at that at all?
I have not. I don't know.
I know you actually had one. I wasn't sure. I didn't know that.
It's pretty old.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, like Ember CLI has its own generators now.
Does it have like a watch folder functionality? Or
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Yep.
Is that, and does it compile fast or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
it does.
We've got, I don't know how many files we have, but ours build is like 1.5 seconds, I think, is about the average.
Yeah,
Or,
that's,
on
and
a
our
rebuild.
build that's considered long. Broccoli is the whole thing. They built Broccoli to like fix the problems with grunt. If you really don't use grunt as a build tool, where sometimes you just kind of exponentially get larger and larger.
Well, another thing with it, if you're using Ember CLI, it comes with a built-in node server, and they'll tell you it's not a production level node server. But out of the box with Ember CLI, if you do watch, it actually has live reload and everything else.
Oh, yeah,
So you
yes.
can make your changes and save it, and then go back to your browser, and it'll automatically refresh, and your page will go back
Nice.
to where it was.
But
So-
Broccoli does in-memory trees, and it does just the differences between the trees, so it's very, very, very fast. It doesn't go to disk, and it only does deltas. It's a complete re-envision of what the other build tools were doing, but they didn't feel were doing correctly. So it's we've been pretty happy with it. I mean, there was a few rough spots in the very beginning, but I mean, the
Yeah.
very beginning of everything there's rough spots. So
We used Brunch before as a build tool,
Yeah.
and then we switched to Ember CLI a couple months ago.
So are you saying that Ember CLI is an alternative to using Broccoli or any of
But Ember CLI uses Broccoli.
Oh, okay. They come.
yeah,
Okay.
you don't need Ember CLI at all.
Gotcha.
You could, if you wanted to load up Ember CLI, but you didn't want to use Broccoli for some reason, you could. But it's back to that whole, it's so tightly integrated because that's what
Yeah.
they just expect you
Yeah.
to do. When we initially weren't going to use Ember CLI, because at the beginning of it, we weren't sure if we wanted some of the stuff it had. So we're like, all right, we'll do Brunch. Let's replace Brunch with Broccoli. Let's try to pull in some of the other things. And then we started growing. We're just like, well, there's other couple things we don't have now that Ember CLI does. They're
Gotcha.
actually kind of cool, and we're maintaining all of this ourselves. And so we just swapped it all out. It didn't take very long to swap it. It was just really getting down to the syntax of like how to manage your trees and say, these are precompiled this way, and then pass back out to the larger trees so they can all be flat. Just get used to that merged tree concept inside
Okay.
Broccoli.
So if you do go with Ember CLI though, it ships with Broccoli?
Yeah.
Okay, so you wouldn't have to install Broccoli separately. You
Correct.
just do that.
Yeah, when you
and
when you do an npm install of Ember
listed
CLI,
as a dependency.
It's got a command line generator, and when
Okay.
you do Ember new,
yeah,
that's
when you
gonna
create a
go
new
through-
project is when it does it.
and it's going to
Okay.
do all.
So it's possible, let's say 6 months apart, you said Ember new, you will have a different version of your project, like, because there's an upgrade to Broccoli and an upgrade to
Yeah.
all these things.
Yeah.
And then you can upgrade each individual version, they have an update command inside of the project, so you can, self-update.
Cool.
But yeah, you get all that stuff at the creation of the project, not the installation of Ember CLI.
Cool. Awesome.
All right, so there we go. This is the fun part, right?
Sorry, actually, before
Oh,
we
okay.
jump into that, in your example of the Ember app, just the HTML example you had where you have your, right up at the top there, required JavaScript
Yeah.
libraries. You had mentioned additional libraries that your application may need, like Moment or stuff like that. Is there a way to do that almost through like a dependency injection into when you need it instead of loading it on page load?
Yes, you
Loading
could
it?
do that.
Well, if you
Here, it might be a tad easier. In Ember CLI, it all gets built into the vendor.js by default, and it's just there.
And it's just, okay.
It's just there.
Gotcha.
But you could have your, you could have your view say on will insert element, I know I'm about to need something. I could inject a script tag into the
So you go ahead
that already
and fetch
exists,
it,
use some
or-
jQuery, it would go fetch it, watch the did load, or I'm trying to remember what the event is on that.
Yeah.
I don't do that very often. Okay, now that I know it, now I can do, like, you could make it happen if you needed that type of optimization. You certainly could. There's nothing, Ember really stays out of your way. Like,
Okay.
its job is to be an application architecture, and it goes, oh, that's HTML and DOM kind of stuff. We'll give you a couple little hooks, but there's stuff that does that.
Okay.
Like, you can use jQuery all you want. You don't have to use jQuery. They stay out of jQuery's way. Like, there's nothing special you have to do to get the two to coexist. You just are. Same thing with any other library. They just exist. Like, they really do a good job of staying out of the way. Where you'll run into issues is when you try to take a library. What was it called, Josh? Data tables? Is that the big one? It's a jQuery library.
I think it was data table.
I think it's data tables. Very popular table grid library that you do all kinds of data table stuff. And we tried to use that originally to make a grid inside of Ember. And the problem is, and you'll see in the templates, now, imagine you've got some stuff here that needs to be Emberized. Like, it needs to have the context of an object. I'm going to link to, and we'll see these examples, I need to link to this, I need to go to the user route with this user object. You need it to be handlebar, Emberized, interpreted code. Well, you can't do that on somebody else's library. Like, even if they give you a return callback, it's always, I'm modifying the HTML that's inside of it. I'm doing something. Like, you can't get a true Ember reference, no matter how low you go. Because we started rewriting, and then you had to change some more, and you change some more, and then you change some more. And you're like, well, by the time I'm done, I'm just going to have my own Ember library, because I can't get low enough. So that's like the biggest integration problem with Ember. And it's not Ember's fault, per se. It's that a lot of these libraries that are out there weren't written at a time where there's handlebar templates, where there's this concept of, I have live interpretation of the context. I'm not just text. I need to have some code and some logic and some scope with me.
But you're not able to then pass variables or parameters that tell that recipient how to manipulate that text?
Depends on what you want to do. If you want to display the text there, you absolutely can. If you want to click it and hard code, like have it hard code a specific route, so it says go here with item ID 12, and then it would load that route. It would have to go load that user if it didn't already exist. Versus in Ember, you can actually just pass that user data. So you can absolutely accomplish it. But to be 100% Ember, if you're doing a lot of Ember things, like we want to be able to have this row and have a drop down that says delete this user, do this thing to this user, we didn't have the context of the user. All we had was a text ID of the user, not the actual user object. Because it wasn't an Ember library, so it didn't know how to be Emberized. So visually it looked okay, but when you're trying to use it at that low level, you're missing some connections that you wish you had. So we wrote our own.
So you
Because data grids are a whole other beast.
So even if you had passed the word delete as in the operation you wanted to perform against that user that you had passed, it didn't have the ability to go.
Correct, because that code didn't know what Ember was. And we'll come back to that, because when you see how you actually put those things in the code, I think you'll go, oh, I get it, because I don't have access to do that there. So, and if not, we can still talk
And
afterwards.
one of the questions
Sure.
I wanted to ask is, you said that with this application, you could email someone this URL,
Mhm.
and they will pull up the same thing.
Correct.
That means there's no personalization, that when you invoke it, it knows you are user 12, and you've got these
Depends-
customization profile.
Depends on what you want your application to
etc.
do. If it requires authentication, then when your app loads, it requires the user to log in, and then you can do something. That statement was more geared towards if I'm on a page and I have 3 columns, I want the second column collapsed, I want the third column scrolled halfway down, and I want this modal to already be displayed, I can capture that entire that application state in a URL. And when I send it to you, you don't just end up at the home page, you end up with that second column collapsed, the third one scrolled halfway down, and modal already displayed. The URL can represent the entire state of the application, not just a file on disk like your traditional website or web page. It truly is an application state.
Okay.
Now, you can tie that in with whether they need to be logged in first or not, and there's that kind of stuff. So it'll still work, but it was geared more towards the application state and not necessarily a specific user. But you can meld the two together very seamlessly.
And all of this is in the URL?
Yes, it can be.
So how about for all the security consciousness? Is there anything then in all this URL that you don't want people to see?
Nope. I mean, what would there be?
I mean, you control what goes there. It doesn't
Yeah.
just automatically tag this on. One of the big things that like Tom Dale and Peter Katz talked about. Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you think of a hacker. Do you want to expose some information in your
Right, but it's
URL
not going to
that's
just
a-
be
no.
there. Is I guess what I'm saying. Like you can choose what you want to put there. One of their big things is they think that there should be meaning in the URL. So they've talked about the fact that like if you're playing a game or something and you want to send a link to your friend, it shouldn't take them to the game and just be at the beginning.
Yeah.
It should take them to wherever you are in that. But that also that's going to rely on you implementing it so that your app can interpret that URL and go to the right place. But their router and stuff is built in a way to support that. But it doesn't just unnecessarily expose things that you haven't told it to. So you do have control over that. And with authentication and stuff, I mean, and the stuff we've written before, there are certain routes where if you hit that route and you're not logged in, we kick you back to an authentication page, that kind of stuff. So
But then you get redirected back to where you want to go?
if authentication succeeds and you've got your app set up to remember that, then yeah.
If you write it that way. But it's very easy to do that because you can do it in the router and just watch for states.
So everything he said
The
is
Ember
really
application is a
support
giant
for
state
that
machine.
exists.
That's all it is. It's one giant state machine. And the URL is just a visual representation of the state.
So a good way to think about this, though, is that Ember supports that,
Yes.
but it's up to you to implement it how you want it.
Yep.
So if you don't want to take a user to an authenticated page, then you would kick them back to the login screen. But the application, or Ember, supports you to be able to, quote unquote, deep link into an application state. If that makes sense.
And in
Alright.
the case where you were giving the example of the second column was hidden and you were 2/3 the way scrolled down on the third one, that would have had to have been in the URL in order for that to be accomplished.
If you want to be able to share that visual state with somebody else, which is really just a representation of the application state, yes, you would have to do that through the URL because there had to be some way for an external indicator, i.e. the URL, to tell the application what state to be in. If you don't have any desire to share that externally, you can manage all that inside your application by setting properties on the controllers and just never expose it out to the URL. Your application can still work this way, and when I go over to this route and now I'm looking at my profile and then I come back to my news articles, I can still have my columns collapse and I'm scrolled to the right spot because the application maintained that. The URL is think of the URL as a side effect. It's I'm also going to have this if I want to do blah, blah, blah. The URL is not necessary for an Ember application to work. It makes sense to us humans, but it is not needed at all.
Yeah.
Because you can drop an Ember application into somebody else's website. I mean, let's say you have a website and you want to put a little Ember application here. Well, you're not going to be changing the URL. It's self-contained state. URL is just visual eye candy for us.
Now,
It's not needed.
in some of the URLs that I think it was Josh showed,
Yes.
it had a little ID number.
Mhm.
Like 1220123357. If your URL had that to basically know that this was user so-and-so's, session that was open.
Well, I wouldn't do it that way.
If you shared that, how long is that user information retained if
Yeah.
he had closed?
Well, that would be,
That's
so let's
exactly
say you implemented it that way, which you absolutely should not do. If you implemented it that way, that'd be completely dependent on how long the user session stayed alive on your server. It has
Exactly.
nothing to do with your HTML application
Exactly.
or your JavaScript application. Now, you should not be, that's not how you do your user stuff. It should be you can keep a value, a session ID that can talk back and forth to the server, but it belongs just to that session at the moment. You can encrypt it. Like you should never do that. It should never be in the URL. So that way it's not accidentally shared or seen.
Well,
I mean, that's just not where you
thinking
store
would
it.
be intentionally shared, because if he wanted his friend to see exactly what he was seeing.
Well, that would require you to have
Might
his
be-
credentials to log in, though.
Well,
So-
let's say it wasn't, this really did get you into.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can pass it along, and then as long as your routes knew to
Without
take that, look that user up and set that model that came back for that information on this controller, you absolutely could. Don't.
I mean,
But
at
you
that point,
could.
though, at this point, it's not. There's nothing Ember specific about that.
Right.
At this point, we're just
Exactly.
talking about your building an app in a really insecure way, and so Ember will let you do that as much as any other framework will let you do that.
Yes.
So I've got two examples that I think may help. First, directly related to your last question about the user ID and the URL and stuff like that. If you think about how Facebook works, their URLs have a unique identifier for you as a user. When you share that, depending on if the person that is going to that URL is authenticated or not, changes what they see, but the URL stays the same. So the application itself, based on other things outside of the URL, changes what is rendered. Granted, there's probably some server-side stuff because they're not exposing all of that to the client side, which is kind of what your point was earlier. You know, authentication is going to have some type of server-side component to it to be secure. So that's kind of one example. The other example was that I had in mind was to your earlier question about the scrolling down and all that stuff, and it being in the URL. If you think about an FAQ section for your application, if you want to be able to deep link to a specific FAQs, but you want, when a user gets there, it to be scrolled down to that FAQ and that FAQ be expanded, that would be an example where your URL could just be the ID of the FAQ, and then your application itself would say, oh, I know I need to load this FAQ, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to that section and have it auto-expand it out. So it's not necessarily in your URL saying scroll to this section, auto-expand it. It's your application that's interpreting
And in that example, your route would set a property on the controller saying this is the ID or whatever to scroll to. When
Right.
your template renders, it would go through its view. The view would say, hey, do I have anywhere I'm supposed to scroll to? Hey, controller, what's my data? Oh, I'm supposed to scroll here. On my data insert element, I'm going to take off a scroll to, give it the ID, and the page will go.
Right.
Or if I don't want the user to see that scroll, then I can do it on a will insert element, move the position so that way when it renders, it's already there. Again, however you want to implement it. But yeah, exactly. It came in on the router, it got set on the controller, and then the view reacted to that data.
Yeah.
No, I didn't mean to imply that the URL would say scroll 2/3 the way down,
Okay.
column 3.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I figured there would be some tag in there that said that was what the
Yeah.
application was supposed to do.
For sure.
All right, so live code. Okay, so I'm using Ember CLI. So again, you don't have to use this tool. You don't have to put them in separate files, but I strongly recommend it. All right, so I already have Ember CLI installed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call it demo. This will take just a moment, depending on the speed of our internet here, because I'm on the public Wi-Fi. I should probably
And all you
I should probably
installed
also
was
get out of that
Ember.
later. I'm sorry,
And all you installed was Ember.
Ember CLI.
Which is a node module. It's a npm install.
Ember CLI is a project building tool. When I create a new Ember project using it, it will then install Ember for me and other things too. So I'm going to create a new project called demo. And this is where it's getting the version of
Okay.
Broccoli, and
Cool.
we've got Brunch handlebars, and Ember, and all that stuff.
So if you've done 3 projects over a period of 2 years, you now have 3 different versions of Broccoli
Correct.
installed somewhere.
But they're self-contained to that project. So you can go back to your source code and still be able to rebuild it based on the version it was written. So you don't install the new version and then it falls apart. Like it's self-contained, isolated.
It's like using those self-contained environments where you can install specific versions.
But it also
of
means
module.
3 times disk space.
Oh, but
Yes.
this is so
Which
cheap
costs
now.
0 cents.
Yeah.
We sell a lot of disk space here. If you're gonna-
Do your clouds come with Ember?
No. The clouds are, you can do anything you want to them, but they come empty. Like they're truly like, you choose what you want. We can just give you availability. give you more. But the general idea is it's an empty disk. You do what you want. All right, so I'm going to go into this project. All right, here we go. So I'm going to start up my server. So this is just that way I don't have to have another server somewhere. I can just go to this URL and load it up. I could just as easily build this project and then point my own server URL to that. Like again, it doesn't matter. They're just files. So I'm going to go to this URL right here because it tells me what it is. It changes depending on what environment you're in. My home one is different than here. So point is, if you're like, oh, I went to this earlier, why did it not work when I hit reload? Well, maybe you're on a different network. It'll give you different private IPs.
Well, you can also have multiple ones running.
Yes, you can.
It'll change
Correct.
the number every time you start a new one.
All right, so out of the box with Ember CLI, this is what you get. Boom, welcome to Ember. And there you go. So now let's look at the code. Here's my demo. All right, so out of the box, the app folder is where your app lives. They have the tests go here. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at this. It's about the app tonight. But anyway, you get all these things. All right, so here's your application. There's your app. All of this stuff just happens out of the box. This is all code you would have to write yourself. This is what Ember CLI gives you. All right. So, yes.
Well, I was just going to say, Ember CLI also uses ES6 modules. So the
Import and export.
Yeah, all of this stuff up here.
Export.
So as part of the build process, they're using the ES6 transpiler from Square, I believe.
Yeah, they're fixing to change. It's all behind the scenes, so it
So
doesn't
let's-
really matter which transpiler
Yeah.
they use as long as it's.
So it lets you write ES6 code as long as you write limited amounts of it. Mainly imports, exports. I think it supports let and a few other things. It doesn't have full support, but it has just the support that you need to do Ember. So it lets you do these imports and exports. And then when it does its compilation through that transpiler, it converts them into required syntax. So they'll work on any browser out there. You don't have to have an ES6 compatible browser. But this is future-proof. And it also lets us here, we have a bunch of shared libraries that are add-ons. And then we can just import them into this application and that application, et cetera. So we went to this first, like we went to this as soon as we possibly could, so we can write one shared source library. We have a grid that any project can use. We've got a calendar any project can use. We've got translations, we've got a data layer, we've got all these things that we can just import and use.
This transpiler was recently made available in the latest version, or was it always
It's been
there?
out for 3-4 months, maybe longer. Like as far as like the stable they're using it, it's from the Square, the credit card reader company. That's the version that's being used right now. Before that, they were using somebody else's transpiler. And like Matt said, I think they're about to switch to somebody else's as well. As soon as ES6, as soon as this supports in the browsers, then during your build process, you just won't do transpiler. Your code will be the same. Like we won't have to change any of our code, assuming they don't change the spec.
But the big
I feel pretty secure they won't on this, but hey,
One of the biggest things, the reason I pointed out is because all the stuff that he went through talked about naming conventions. When you're using ES6, it's going to be looking it up by folder and by structure, like directory structure. So you won't, it's not quite like in the guide or in the notes he made where it's like app dot and you put, you know, app dot application controller, app dot index controller. Instead, you'll have a file in the controllers called application.js that'll export your
well, we don't have it yet. We will.
But yeah, so the point is if you don't see where those namespaces apply, that's because this is ES6 as opposed to putting everything on the global namespace. So that's why that's not.
So that's unfortunately one of those learning curve things is you look at the guides, and again, there's nothing wrong with the guides, especially if you're putting it all on a single page. When you switch over to this stuff, you introduce another concept. If you don't know what imports and exports in ES6, like, you know, it's like, oh, I just want to learn one thing, great, I learned 4 more. And while I was learning one of those other things, I had to learn 2 more. And eventually you come back around and you're like, oh, this all makes sense and it's awesome. But don't necessarily expect to sit down in 2 hours, because if you're not familiar with, you know, half of the concepts we talk about tonight, it's going to be a little rough at the beginning. Again, that learning curve. They're very bleeding edge as far as concepts go, technologies.
But they don't honestly expect you to build it on the page.
They don't discuss how to build it any other way.
Yeah,
That-
well, they
the
just don't have a
unspoken,
preference.
the unspoken is that no, you would never do it that way. But the official guides never talk
That's-
about
that's
how
what
to.
that makes it kind of weird. Why would they explain?
Completely
you
agree.
can
It's
do
a
it
gap
this
in their
way?
documentation.
I think the biggest
Their answer now is use Ember CLI.
And I think that the thing is the documentation tends to focus, it's not necessarily focusing app level, it's focusing like, here's this concept that you're
Features.
looking at right now,
Features.
here's how you use this, like, here's how you instantiate this controller, and that kind of thing.
That's honestly one of the hardest things getting started with Ember is, like if you've never had to build, you've never been in the front end doing building, what's Brunch, Node, Bower, you know, all these things, and what possibly went wrong.
But the Ember CLI website has pretty good docs
Yeah,
now.
and if you use that tool, I mean, it just, boom, we just created an app, here we go. Yeah. Okay, so let's go out here to the console. All right, so out of the box, it tells you, well, it'll tell you all your libraries that you have, so you can see what versions. These are all those auto-generated things. Because remember, you haven't seen me create anything yet. I haven't created any specific controllers or views or any of those things. This is what's happening out of the box. It automatically created an application route. The controller, the application controller generated an index controller, you know, all these things. Because we are on the index route right now. So there's the application as a whole, and then you've got routes. This is the index route. And it created this index controller because I didn't have one, but it needs one in order to work. We'll go through creating these as we go. So anyway, and it tells you didn't specify an index template or a view. So there's nothing rendered. There is nothing rendered right here. This comes from the application. So if I go look at my templates, open up my application, right there. I have no content in my index. But if I had an index template, it would get rendered into that outlet, which is what we're about to go and do. Okay.
So you leave this?
No, this is just the hello world. Except it doesn't say hello world. No, we can change this whatever we want. So, matter of fact, we're going to change it. So, let me do this first. So this is our application. So, since they don't know how you're going to use your Ember application, whether it's the entire site or it's going to be put inside of a div somewhere, they don't make assumptions and give you the HTML body tags, because the HTML body tags will not be valid if you're putting it inside of a div. However, we're not doing that, so I'm going to make it a valid, whatever. Now, don't get me wrong, the browser is smart to figure it out. It's not going to kill you, blah, blah, blah. But when somebody pulls it up in HTML, or excuse me, IE4, and it just goes,
How are you going to change your index size?
And so what is your index?
no, this is my application. Like, this is my whole thing. This is not just my index. I don't have an index yet.
Yeah,
There is.
Yeah,
It's on the root of your app, right there.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot I did that. You're correct. Sorry. We can take this off here. Wrong file. Thank you.
Because it wouldn't be working at all if that was all you had.
Yes. There we go, we're back to that. Okay. Yes, this is the main page that's serving your HTML that is causing your Ember application to render itself. Like starting the fire. Thank you. Okay. So, back in here, so we can just change this and say, whatever we want. We'll just say, just so you can see this stuff changing. I cannot type, and I knew better than do this. Okay. So if I save this, as Josh was talking about earlier, you get the automatic site reload built in. So all I did was save the file. The Ember watch is watching. It goes, hey, something changed. It rebuilt it. Browser says, hey, I just got rebuilt. So it just automatically did this. I don't have to do anything. Live reload. It's just a handy little development thing. Okay. So let's go to our command line. So this is the screen that's just doing the build. You can see it took, I guess I can look at it here. It took, not very long, right around a second to do that, because it changed this file right here, and it ran, 1.9 seconds to do the full rebuild of the code. All right, so I'm going to go to this screen. I'm in the same folder. I will be. I'm in the same folder. All right, so I'm going to generate our index route. And again, you can go write these by hand. I'm just using Ember Generator to do it for me because it's so much faster. Okay. So I created my index route. It automatically knew that I was going to want a template to go with it. Remember what we talked about before? What's important? Your routes, your templates, and then any data you want to back it. It didn't create a controller for you. Because that's, out of the box, controllers are powerful, but they're not necessary. But you use them a lot, so don't don't dismiss them. It's just they're not out of the box. Okay. So now when I come back over here, oops, let me do that. I now have an index template. So now I can say, this is the index template. So that way we'll be able to see all this stuff showing up. All right. So, I guess I should explain what we're going to demo, besides just the code. So what I figured we would do, I skipped that part. What I figured we would do, okay, notice how you now have your index template showing? So this was in our application. This is now our index. So what we're going to build is a shopping cart. Very simple though, don't be too excited. You're not going to sell stuff from this. But we're going to have a product page that lists the products. You're going to be able to add it to the cart. You're going to be able to go see the items in your cart. You're going to be able to see the totals that are getting updated. You'll be able to see all this automatic binding that's going on and how all those things work. It's going to be a good demonstration of all these concepts that we talked about. And you can see some things that we also didn't talk about, but you can see them in action. Because again, this is all about productivity and building an application. It automatically combines your data to those templates. So when the data changes, the visual representation changes. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to call anything. You don't have to update anything. You don't have to refresh anything. You don't have to register observers. You don't have to do any of that stuff. It just happens. There's other libraries that do that too. Angular Backbone. You can even get that functionality with Knockout. Like the concept is not a new concept. They've just bundled it in a different way. That I think makes a lot more sense and it's easier to use. All right, so there's our index template. So what I'm going to do now is I want to create a products page because I want to be able to list out all the products that I want to be able to sell to you. So we're going to generate products route because I want to be able to go to /products. All right. So same thing. And when I get out here, I can go to products. But I don't have anything because I haven't done anything yet, right? Okay. Well, I also need a way.
Does Ember automatically have a catch-all for unrecommended routes?
Yes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create some links so you can get back and forth between them.
So, what did he ask?
Oh, I'm sorry. So he asked if there was a catch-all.
Stuff instead of
Correct,
products?
yeah.
You're going to get something
Yeah.
valid.
I mean, right now it's just going to yell at you, but you can set it. You can tell it what to do
Otherwise,
when stuff happens. See this down here? You can set up a handler for that, so you don't get that happening. So you don't get the reaction out of the box, but you get the hook out of the box.
The user doesn't see that, does he?
Well, if they turn off the console, they wouldn't see it. But this error, if you built this code right now in production, you would still get that if they went to an unrecognized URL. Because the route doesn't know where to go. Because you haven't set up the catch-all reaction yet. All right, so we're going to go create a couple of the links real quick. So I'm going to go back into my application template.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Look at the router.js. Go over that a little bit. The router.
This? Well, we only have...
Well, right, but that got added, right?
Yes.
That products in 3.0.
Oh, yes. So when we added those routes from the command line, the Ember generate router, it came in here and added in our routes.
But he didn't
For us.
add index.
Well, index is.
They give it to-
It's a default.
Yeah.
Like I can put it here, and literally nothing's going to change other than I just made my code base larger. Which again, in this space doesn't matter.
You can also change paths or something like if you want your index to be at a different path, so you want your app to run its index control and everything like that, so you can actually specify a path. But if you don't need to change anything, it gives you
Actually,
the index out of the box.
This would actually take this URL
Yeah,
and
so
render the
you
index
go
right
there,
backwards.
run all of your index.
But no, index is a magic thing. You automatically get an index, just like you automatically get an application. But as we go adding more routes, which we're going to, you'll see this file. I can leave it open. You'll see more things getting added to it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my application here. I'm going to just throw some HTML because I'm in a template. Notice that, so I'm in my templates folder. These have HBS extensions. Handlebar, I think it's actually what it stands for. So handlebars is what that stands for. That's just the out-of-box extension. You'd have to go, if you want them to be different, again, for whatever reason, you're going to change your build tool to look for different extensions, blah, blah, blah. So again, even though there's opinions, it's all changeable. It's just how much of an argument you want to get in when you're expressing your own opinion.
Now, when you say change them, are you talking about still use handlebars as your templating engine?
Correct, if you just want to change the
Okay.
extension for some reason.
Okay.
Because some projects, like older projects, you'll see actual, it's called .template.
Okay.
That was before anybody standardized on HBS. But yes, you're still using handlebar use,
Okay.
just a file name.
At the same time, the end user's never gonna see that. It's-
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it
Compiled
gets,
into a single,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly. All right, so here is our first little bit of Ember magic. Now I put page here. I really should have said go home. We're only on one single HTML page. We're changing view states of the HTML and the elements that you see. We never left another page. The server never gave us a new web request. We're a single page application. So I don't use the word pages. Use the word views. I'm viewing a different route. I'm not loading another page because they mean something different. If you reload this app, you're resetting the entire state of the application. You're not building a website, you're building an application that happens to be served by a web server. And that's the same whether it's Backbone, Angular, Ember, that's not specific to Ember. Just that you're building a single page JavaScript application that doesn't have to run in a web browser either. It can run on a phone, it can run as a plug-in to a browser, it can run pretty much anywhere you can package it up.
But to the majority of your end users, they still think they're pages.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because if you did it right,
So you don't
visually,
want, you
you're
don't
going
want to
to
say go to the home view.
right, exactly.
Because they won't know.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just keep it politically correct and call it home. All right. So let's do another one. So what the link to is letting me do is I'm specifying a route I want to go to. So this is saying, this is that Ember magic I was talking about earlier when you're trying to make like a grid. This tells Handlebars, or rather Handlebars says, okay, I know to take this, and I'm going to run code, and I'm going to generate a hyperlink, and I'm going to use this to generate what my URL should be when I click. So that's what the user thinks is happening, but it's really inside the context of this, it's passing off this as a parameter to your router to know where to go. There's other things you can pass in too, like if we were loading a specific user, I could go to the user route with this user object, and I can pass on the parameters, and we're not going to get that advanced. But it's not as just, you can do more than just this simple creating a link. But it's this ability right here to have HTML created for you within the context of your application that you sometimes have trouble bridging the gap with other third-party libraries because you can't put this into their code because they're not rendering handlebar templates.
Is that a Ember-specific handlebars helper?
The link to it, yes. So Handlebars, I forgot to mention this earlier. Handlebars is a templating engine written on top of a Mustache templating engine. And just like, I don't know if you noticed earlier, the build tools were Brunch and Mimosa.
Yeah.
Right.
Mimosa came after Brunch. So yes, the link to is a Handlebars-specific, Ember-specific thing. Handlebars was written by the Ember team.
Oh.
And it's an extension to Mustache. Any of your Mustache templates will work in Handlebars, so you don't have to I've got to change it. Like if you already have an app written and it's using Mustache, they'll all work. You just get extra stuff with Handlebars. All right, so save this.
We'll change the link.
I like name for both.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay. And when we come over here, all right, so now I've got home and products. And I can move back and forth. Again, there's nothing here because we haven't done the products route yet. But you can see that the URL is changing. This is not putting the slash index as index is that magic thing. If you actually wanted it to be there, you can turn it on and specify that kind of stuff. Yes?
When you use templates as files, do they get cached or does it request the template each time?
So what happens is during the build process, it goes through each handlebars file and it precompiles them and stores them inside in a templates array. And they're ready to be executed JavaScript. And then when your Ember application fires up, they're there. So when they get requested, then it says, oh, I've already got this going. I'll just execute this anonymous JavaScript function. Now I've got my template and I know what to do with it and I can react to it. So during the build process, it precompiles all of those. If you're putting them all into that single example we're talking about, and you load it, the first time the Ember application started, it would then do that pre-compilation. So it's faster to do a build because it's doing pre-compilation of your templates for you. But if there's now we're, it's fine with me, we're stepping out of the, can I even get Ember this way? Yeah, I think I can get it. I'll come back to it. I haven't done that for the ES6. I think I need to reference it differently. I'm old school with this stuff down here in the console, so I'll have to go find out how to get it. Because ES6 has different lookups underneath, that's all. But you can actually see all the templates in here, because they're just part of the application. All right, so
Then it'll be a single part of that. They're not separate files.
no, it's an
Yeah.
array. It's an array of templates by name and functions to execute to become that template. Yeah, all these files here, none of this exists anymore. The only thing that exists is this file, but you can see that it replaces things. Like it takes this file, puts
Can
some
you
stuff
show us
in
the
it,
build?
copies it to your
You can
disk.
look in disk.
Yeah, there we go, yeah. So here's the disk. This is where it puts it. These are your built files. So this is your generated index.html file. And then it puts other stuff into your assets, which in this case, our application is called demo. Now, it looks like this in development only. This is so you can get sort of source map working in the console. If we did a production build, this would be one gigantic minified object-cated code. So this is truly for development only for source mapping, because that's an interesting thing with the browsers right now and how you do this stuff. So this was their closest compromise they could reach. And so probably in one of these, okay, here's our templates. So we're exporting, it's just a function. Handlebars template, function anonymous, handlebars. At some point in here, you'll be able to find, assuming I picked a good one. Yeah, there we go. So there's some code. But all this is it gets put later into an actual templates array.
And bindings and stuff get injected and as parameters.
A lot of magic happens during that compilation state. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, so we've got our home page. We have our products. All right, so now we want to have some products, right? So what we're going to need is a product model in order to hold on to all of our products, because again, that's our data, and these products are most likely coming from the server. Although we're not going to write that part. We're just going to show it all locally. So I could do a Ember generate model products. However, Ember CLI expects you to be using Ember data alongside it, and so it's going to create a model that has imports of the Ember data, namespace, and a bunch of that stuff that we're not using for this. So in this particular case, I'm just going to create my own model, because at the end of the day, what's a model? Just an object that stores some data. Subtle differences in what you're importing at the top. So I'm just going to actually create my own file. Now, I'm not calling this products. It's a slight distinction, because this is a product model. This is the object that represents a product. My products controller has multiple product models on it because it's an array controller. And my products route is going to show me my collection of products, but they're all individual product models. So that's why you'll see, like, well, why did you put an S on the end? That's why. Because the models are a singular concept. The collection of them is the plural concept.
And this is MODEL, where in one case on one slide it was MODAL.
If it was at the bottom, it was a modal, meaning it popped up. I may have transposed the spelling. The A is a modal, which is like those pop-up windows that might be annoying alerts, but an actual like light box kind of effect. Versus a model is the data. And if I transpose those, I apologize.
I don't think you did.
Okay.
I mean, there was one that.
Yes, there is a modal in the slides, yes.
But only one.
Yeah, that's completely view related. Okay, so now we get to go into the fun stuff. So let's go look at our model that we just created. Here's our product model. Okay, so because we're using ES6, I am going to import the Ember library from the Ember namespace. I then have to do this. All right, so I want this to just be a model, right? Because that's what we just said our models, excuse me. I want this to be an object because that's what we just said our models are. They're objects. So I now have a product model. It doesn't do anything because it can't hold any data. It doesn't have any properties, but that's it. I'm importing Ember from the namespace, and then I am extending this Ember object because now I'm going to do things. So we're just going to keep it really simple. I'm going to give it a SKU. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to give it a price. And I'm going to give it a task tag. Boom. We now have a model. That's not even Ember specific. That's just common programming practices.
But you don't have to have a quantity to know how many you have in stock.
a product, you could. I'm not in this demo. I suppose you could, sure. It'd be valid. Because yes, for this product, this is my quantity. Yeah, you can do that. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my products route, because when I go there, I want to have something happen. Remember, my route is going to request my model, and then it's going to attach that to my controller so the view and the templates can know how to render it. Again, the template being the one that's really doing that, the view is just helping. Okay, so there's a hook inside of the route called model. There's a series of these, we're not going to go into them, there's a series of hooks that fire in a certain order. The model hook is where you go and get your data for your model. What am I doing? Okay. I'm going to create this. In this case, because remember I said we're not going to go out to the server and get anything. In here I would do like a store.find or memberdata.find, or I do a jQuery Ajax call, or I can do something to go outside to get my data. In this example, I'm not doing that. So in this case, I'm just saying, hey, I'm going to create an array, and I'm going to throw things in that array. And then I'm going to return my model.
Sorry, the .a you said was
Yeah, so Ember has a bunch of shortcuts.
okay.
I can do that also.
Cool. Okay, makes sense.
You write it long enough, you just get
Yeah.
shorter. Yeah, Ember.a is just a shortcuts Ember array.
Disk space.
Yeah, you can make it a regular array, but you're going to find in the Ember world, you're going to want everything to be the Emberized version of the things, because they give you maps, and they give you filters, and they give you proxying and lookups, and I'm forgetting probably 50 different things.
A lot of just polyfill stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, like you're better off just using their version of things.
Okay.
But you could just easily make that an array. But again, convention. We can show you afterwards. I can create one, just make that an array, and watch it all blow up. Because that mixes in like proxy mix-ins for lookups against the content model. Like it knows how to be a model on the content, and yeah,
Okay.
lots
Cool.
of magic.
Cool.
The guides explain that stuff really well. That's why I'm not going over it.
Cool.
Okay, so I've created a model, which right now doesn't have anything, but I'm just setting up the basic, and then I'm going to go to my product template, which remember, out here, it shows nothing. So now I'm going to tell my product template that I'm going to do another handlebars helper. And what I'm saying is that as a template, I know I've got a model on me. For each record in that model, I want to render this data. So that each gives you a handy way to loop over the content that's assigned to you as your model. Yes?
What would happen if you accidentally do a hash each on an object model or
Error.
you? So it's not going to iterate then
If you
the
had-
accidentally iterate the content.
No, we'll not.
If you had an object model with an array as one of its variables, you could do like each model dot.
Yeah, like this format is, you can
You're not going to miss
expand,
anything. I'm just typing
you
it
can
quick,
expand the each out to actually say like each, in this case you could say each like item in a controller or something like that.
Okay.
But if you don't do that, this is going to assume that you're wanting to hit the controller and that you have an array controller. And there's some subtle differences, but they're just two different ways to iterate using that helper.
Okay, so this demo has 0 CSS in it, because that's not what we're here to talk about. So I don't want you looking at this guy going, okay, he's putting breaks in for his spacing. I'm not listening to anything else he's saying. I know there's a better way to do it. I'm not doing it tonight. All right. So if we come back to our products, wait a second, we still don't have anything. Why not? Didn't we just tell it that I want this stuff? Well, we told it we want that stuff for each thing we have. And when we're over here in our route, we still don't have things. So it's smart enough to not just give you something else you don't want, or blank attributes, etc. One other little thing that you can do in this condition, do it. That's exactly it. Really? Thank you, Sublime.
Here's our notes.
Boom. There you go. So again, because you have all these bindings that automatically happen for you as a combination of what Ember gives you and what handlebars gives you, which was written for Ember, you get that type of capability. We have an else condition on our each. So now you're seeing some text. As soon as we put some content into our array, which we're about to do, then the else condition is no longer being hit, and instead you're going to get this other template rendered out on the screen. That concept, remember when I said you learn these concepts, there's no other pattern to learn. That prevails through the entire application. Whether you're dealing with dynamically loaded models, you're dealing with a template, promises, like it all works the same way. So again, once you get used to that pattern, that's it. There's not 4 ways you have to deal with the concept of loading or any of those waiting on kind of things. One pattern. Okay. So, all right, so let's go to our products route. So in this case, we're going to take our model, and I'm going to add an object to it. Now, the add object comes from the fact that I'm an Ember array. And I'm adding an object because, instead of just pushing to it, because internally it's going to fire all the correct, it's going to bind up all the observers, it's going to fire getters, setters, like all the Ember magic happens if you use the Ember magic methods. So you add an object to an Ember array instead of saying push object, which is like a native JavaScript way of doing it. This helps keep all that magic wired up.
The push wouldn't work, or?
Oh, it'll work, but you can push here and it won't yell at you, but nothing's going to work in your application the way you expect it to. And you'll probably even get errors because it's expected to loop over something because this isn't an object, I can't call this on it. Like you'll know you did it wrong.
You can pass a raw array into the Ember A, and it'll go through
It'll
that, and
convert.
it'll Ember out.
Yeah, correct. We could do it here too. I just have too many properties.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, again, I'm just adding an object to my array. And we're in the product route, right? So I want to add products. So in this particular case, I have that product model, correct? And so I am going to create an object to add it in here. I don't have this yet. Again, this is ES6 and Ember CLI specific. I need to import product from my models product. So now I've pulled the product model into the scope as my product reference here. So that way down here, I can create my product. Now again, this code we're about to do right here, I'm doing this, it's hard-coded locally in the app. You could make an AJAX call out to get data. I didn't want to write the other half that we were going to demo anyway. All right, so, yes.
So there's not technically a collection in Ember, it's just another model that has models inside it?
An array controller is a collection. Correct, there's no native concept of a collection.
Collection.
Yeah, it's just multiple records on an array controller is how they refer to a collection. They do have Ember sets. I have not found a use for them yet. They're closer to a collection, sort of.
Yeah, if you,
I've been doing this for over 2 years and have yet to use it. So it doesn't mean they don't have a use. I have yet to run into it.
if you use Ember data, they have some things called like a record array.
Yeah, they have
More-
things that are closer to it, but that's gives you a full-fledged like ORM data store that has those concepts.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a SKU. We'll do, we won't do very many of these. First product. Price. Let's just do this. Sales and tax. Whatever. $1.50, right? Okay. So. All right, so we'll do one of them just for now so you can see it. We'll make sure nothing's broke. Now it's going to reload the products. Do what? I did it earlier. What did I do
You
wrong?
have a few JavaScript errors in there.
Oh, did I?
You have an extra semicolon and extra curly braces.
That might be good.
You have extra curly braces.
Yeah,
on the add
I think
object.
you need the, on the add object.
Oh, yeah.
You have to use that code phrase, that wrapping.
That one is.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you're right. My object is my object, not another. Okay, rebuild successful. Oh, look at that, it beat me to it. All right, so now again, I can go back to my home, my products. What we didn't show is I can go directly to this, which you're kind of seeing through the refresh anyway. and it's there. So I can go to any one of those URLs. I can move around between them. Okay, so I can let's do one more. So we've got 2 products in there. This time I'm going to copy and paste. Let's say 246, second product, $1.37 and 12 cents. And now we've got 2. Okay.
So how do you fix the rendering for the tax value? $1.5.
We're going to get there.
Okay.
All right, so one of the things you can do if you wanted to test that everything's working, like let's say I had a part of my app that when I click this button, it adds a new product to my data, whatever, right? You just want to be able to test it. You can come down here to the console and you can you can interact with it because it's just an Ember application. Like it's just, rather it's just a JavaScript application. So let me copy this because I do not want to type this. Okay, so I talked earlier, we can get to it afterwards. I'm just going to hit this high notes and then we'll hit it later if anybody has any questions. They have a dependency injection container that they use inside to manage things. So I'm going to do a lookup on that container. I'm going to get my product controller. I'm then going to get the model off of it, because remember the route is setting those products on that product controller on the model property. I'm going to get it. I'm going to add an object. That looks familiar. Isn't that what we were just doing in our route? I'm then going to go and resolve my model product so I have an actual instance of that class. And then I can create it, or excuse me, not an instance, but I have the factory of it. So I can then create it. And I'm going to pass in these values right here. And watch this. Hey, I've got a 3rd product now. Instant binding. Remember the templates? If the model changes underneath, your template automatically redraws itself. Now, if I refresh, what's going to happen?
I would maybe go back.
It's going to go away because it's not hard-coded into our data.
Yeah.
It truly was something down here. And if I do it again, hey, look at that. That works for everything in Ember. Again, all of those bindings are there. You don't have to do anything. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen in other frameworks. I'm just saying, since we're talking about Ember, it's just there. Just like the back button works. I didn't have to write a single line of code for it to know what to do with the back button and to represent the state correctly. They're just things you get out of the box as an application framework that it just gives you. Okay. So, we've got our, yes sir.
I'm sorry, does HTML5 history work in IE8? Does it have a backwards compatible?
I think for IE8 it does the hash.
Does it add the hash?
But you can use the modernizer and also do like your own shim stuff as well. Like you can give it different things to use for how it manages location.
And you can tell it to use the hash mark if that's what you want to.
By default, it's off. I know the box is off, but you can turn it on. You can tell location none because you're putting in a div. You can tell it to use hash. You can tell it to use history. And then in place of history, you can actually, we have code where we use the modernizer library and say, actually use this instead of. And so you can use, they give you 3 options and then you can customize also. We're very fortunate. We don't have to support current -1. So like we have a local storage adapter, 100% pure HTML5 API. Our code base is so light compared to what it would have to be if we had a bunch of shims lying around. Okay, so we have these properties, right? They came from our model, which we looked at over here. Okay, so here's where they are, right? Okay, so what if you wanted to show a user what it's actually going to cost them? Like, what's the combination of price and tax? Well, I don't, for whatever reason, I'm not going to have that coming, it's not pre-calculated, for whatever reason, okay? So we're going to do something inside of our model called a computed property. This is some magic inside of Ember. Yes, ma'am?
This SKU is lowercase, so it's not case sensitive?
Oh, so that came from here. Like, it's just truly HTML. Here is where it's important, because it is case sensitive.
Okay.
This is, I can do this. I really cannot spell. It's truly, yeah. I should have done that to visually draw attention to it. All right, so I'm going to create this total price. This is going to be a function. And what I am going to do is I'm going to get the price, and I'm going to add the text, and I'm just going to write all this out, and we'll talk about Okay. So total price is a property on my model that is really a function. And based off some Ember magic, I'm telling it you are a property, meaning you're a computed property. What do you mean by computed property? I mean that for anything I put in here, I'm going to observe them for any changes. And anytime one of them changes, I'm going to recalculate myself. Let me back up. I'm going to rerun myself. In this case, it's performing an actual calculation, but it's going to rerun this function. So I'm saying I want to watch the price and tax property on this object. And if either one of those changes, I'm going to recalculate total price by rerunning the total price function. What's the total price function going to do? It's going to add my price and my tax. I'm always going to use getters and setters in Ember because it keeps the magic flowing. Because when I do getters, and more importantly setters, it fires off all the correct observer chains. If I just go and talk to a property directly, two things are going to happen. No observers fired, and you just bork the observers. Nothing's going to work past that point on that property because you have stepped outside the ecosystem. So getters and setters, which are just good practice anyway, they're really good practice inside of a framework like this because it's really the only way you keep that magic flowing. So that's what this is doing. So now, I'll save that. I can go back over to my template. I can say total price, and I can say total price. And put another break after it. And I can go back over here, wait for it to reload, and ta-da! Yes, formatting's weird, we're going to fix it, that was intentional. Now we have total price. We never had that property in our data. It's a computed property. You don't have to watch just things that are on what you are. You can reach out to other things and watch stuff too. We're not getting into that, but you can reach outside of what you are and watch anything you want. Don't watch 122 things unless you need to, and if you need to, you're doing it wrong. But it's possible.
So that was really, kind of an example of business logic being put into the controller. Is there?
That's the model.
That's the model.
Yes. Most of your business logic should live in your models.
Okay.
Your application logic is going to live in your route. Your business logic is going to live in your model. And the controllers are just kind of there. Even though they play an important role in them, they're just kind of there.
So can
You do a lot with them.
Can you reference?
Yeah, correct.
Can you reference a function that's outside of this file rather than having a function in the actual model?
You probably could, especially with the imports. You should be able to just import it and put it there.
I mean, just in the case where you want to keep that.
Yes, because you know what? So
separate.
this property is done through a prototype, but you can also do an Ember.computed. I think it's just Ember.computed, and you can define the function. So the point is, you could have a function somewhere, tell it that is an Ember computed function. So when you import it and put it here, it would still work the same way. Because there's two ways to get to it. You could, if you wanted. Yeah, sure. I don't think that's necessarily I don't think it's a pattern you'll see often, but you absolutely can do it. Well, I say absolutely without having tested it, but I'm pretty sure you can do it. All right. So now that we did that, let me come over here and show you that all that magic still works the way we expect it to. All right, so remember, again, we were talking where I'm going to look it up, I'm going to get my controller product, I'm going to get my model. In this particular case, I'm getting my first item, so that $14.49 one. There's also other helper things, like I said, get object add, and there's all kinds of ways to access this. That's not really important. There's a long guide on the Ember site. But I'm going to set the price now to $100.03. So I would expect my total price to equal $101.53 after I'm done executing this. Oh, I was looking at the wrong one when I did the math. Anyway, the math's correct. I'm just not reading my array positions correctly. It was the second object. But the point being that something externally has changed that price. Not only did our price change, because the template is bound to our model, but the total price also changed because it's observing that price property as well. And so the price changed, and then it goes, I need to change, and everything cascades, and voila, there you go.
Now reload the application.
Sure. You lost it. Because that's not a permanent state. That's not, the $100 is not a permanent value in your model. It was something that you were only acting upon your model with against.
You were manipulating it.
Yes, correct. Now, if you wanted to save that, you could say, hey, I want to save this off and do it, whatever. Again, that's all possible.
But not tonight?
Not in this. If you want to stay afterwards, absolutely. But in this demo, no. No. Okay. Next one.
So explain the 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
That is the way JavaScript adds floats and can't decide where it should round. We're going to fix it, but that's what happens when you add two float numbers together. You get to deal with the processor's rounding math.
And 137 and 12 right now is our float.
Because they're just pure, they're floats, but they're just pure numbers. There's not anything going on. No mathematical calculations performed on them. But when you start, floats are weird. So we're going to fix it,
But we
but
thought
that's why.
total price did a mathematical
I'm sorry?
calculation. We thought total price was doing it.
It is. that's
Yeah, total
why.
price is the addition of these two things.
Right.
And because you're adding this as a float and this is a float, you're getting the weird JavaScript computer float results. We're going to fix that. Like that's part of this demo, like how you can fix that. That's not an Ember thing, that's just a JavaScript thing. But we're going to use an Ember thing called helper to fix that. All right, so now we've got products, right? So now we want to be able to show the users these products. We want them to be able to add them to the cart. So based off everything we've talked about so far this evening and what you've seen in this demo, what do you think we need in order to add items to a cart? Like what kind of concepts are we talking about? Are we going to need for this?
Well, model for sure.
Yeah, we're going to need a cart model. Something's got to hold it.
A function to add it.
Yep, exactly. You're going to need some sort of capability to add to the cart. We're going to need a cart's route so we can go to it. We're going to need a cart's template so we can see it. And actually, we're not going to use a cart model because we're just going to use an array to hold all these other models. The cart as itself, it could be its own model as a concept, but for this demo, we're just leaving it truly as just a collection of things. So the cart is just going to be an array holding other models.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it has to be. We have some stuff where we have a cart that is a model and it gets interesting. There's all about this.
So it's going to be more than a product array. It's going to be a model array.
Correct. And we're going to be putting product models in it. It's just an array. It doesn't care what you put in it. The thing that's keeping it from breaking is that we're not breaking it. Like we're only adding products to it and we're expecting them to be products, so when we do things, that's what we expect. If you want to add something else in there and it breaks, well then, the code that's doing the adding, you can do hey, is what I'm about to add an instance of a product model? If it's not, don't let it in. Like, you can do those kinds of things. Again, beyond the scope of what we're demoing this evening. Okay, so, okay, so here we go. Let's create, yes, thank you. All right, we're going to do an Ember generate. You can type out generate, again, it's a shortcut. We're going to create a cart controller. And in this particular case, I want it to be an array controller. So I'm telling it, again, this is just some Ember CLI magic. And I'm also going to create a products controller. Which doesn't seem evident at the moment, but I'll show you why in a moment. Okay, so let's go. So nothing changed here. Let's go to our, let's close the page. All right, so now we're going to go look at our products template, which is what we were just looking at. Visually on the screen, we're going to add a button. We're going to say add to cart, button, BR, boom, okay, great. It's going to load itself. Hey, look at that, I can add to the cart. And that's obviously we haven't done anything, right? Now, you might be tempted to say, oh, this is a form. I'm going to wrap a form tag around it. I'm going to do certain things and that kind of stuff. That's not the Ember way. Instead, what we want to do is we want to tell this button that when you are clicked on, I'm going to give you an action to do. I want you to trigger this action. That's how you need to think about it. I'm going to call my action add to cart. You can call it anything as long as it's not like some zero JavaScript word that you can't have a function called that, blah, blah, blah. All right. And I need to add, or excuse me, I need to close it correctly. Okay, so action is another handlebars helper, something special you get with Ember. So I'm saying that when I click this button, I want the add to cart action to be thrown, and I'm going to pass that action as my context, this. What is this? This is the current model of my each. So my product 1, my product 2, my product 3, it's the context. Because that's how we can pass these things around and get all this magic.
So is that action always a click? Or can it be?
No, by default it's a click. You can listen to anything. It comes out of the box wired for I think like 30 or 40 events. And if you want to add any special ones, like copy, paste, that kind of stuff, you can really easily register those as well.
Okay.
They used to come with every event registered. And then they realized only a handful of those really get used, and everything that's registered is heavy. Like, it gets heavier. So they backed it off, and they only watch, there's a list, but they check like keys, clicks, I don't know. There's like 7 or 8 that watches by default. Maybe there's a few more. And then you can add in any of the other ones you can use really easily.
Okay. And then do you define that in your function to check for the event, or do you do it here?
Well, in this particular case, I don't have to tell it to check for the check, because by default, actions look for checks.
Right.
Or not checks, but clicks. So the clicking of this button is automatically going to fire this action, or trigger this action, and it's going to call this add to cart action. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on my product route up here. The order of it doesn't matter. I just like my actions at the top so I can find them. So I have an actions object. It's called add to cart. It's a function. It's going to take in my model. I could just as easily call it product, but the point is I want to be able to, in my Ember application, I want to be able to copy and paste stuff around. If I'm like, oh, I also need this over here, we'll tweak it. I don't want to be like, I got to change every instance of product because now I'm not on the product route, I'm on the cart route, or I'm this or that. Models are concept. I mean, it's the model. I just don't care what type of model it is, so I just call it model. It's, again, easier. It keeps you from having to get locked in on stuff. You can call it whatever you want, just pass them around. But in this particular case, I am going to do a little bit more magic we'll talk about. Okay, so I created an add to cart action that is a definition to catch that action that was triggered from my template. Since I'm in my router, or excuse me, since I'm in my route, I have a method that I can call called controller for. So I can say I want to get the controller for the cart. So now I've reached out from this route and said, hey, controller over here that manages this, come here. Now I'm going to add this model to your content, or to your list of models. Push object works here because model has already been created. That's why you see the push object here instead of the add object. All right, and that should do it.
Now in all of this, you have the open parentheses, space, value, space, close parentheses.
Personal preference.
That space is not required.
Personal preference.
No, this is Java. This is just plain JavaScript.
Yeah, because when it gets flattened, it's all going to be one. It's purely personal preference.
One question.
Sure.
And we can answer this later if you want to. Your actions.
Mhm.
What's kind of, do you have a rule of thumb of when you put an action in a router versus a controller?
So you should always consider putting it in the router first. Because the route is what sets your application state. It says, I'm going to put data on this controller, I'm going to render this template, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to go get data, I'm going to react to data. Now, if the action is, I want to hide or show a row in a table, I want to expand and collapse, that's 100% view. That has nothing to do with anything about your application. Put it on your view. It doesn't even belong on the controller, like it belongs on the view. But if I'm adding a product to a cart, well, that's what am I writing? I'm writing an e-commerce application. That's an application thing. That belongs with the route because that's where your application logic sits. Not your business logic, because that's models, but your application logic sits at the route. Now, can you put it on your controller? Yes. Like, you shouldn't have add to cart actions on your view. That's horribly, horribly wrong. That's just wrong. You can make an argument for controller, but I would talk you out of it. Because you'll find as you write larger and larger applications, the route is where they make sense. Because you want to start sharing things. Controller should be able to, okay, I'm looking at my products. I'm the product route. I'm going to go get my product data. I have 120 properties about mine. I'm then going to throw them into this controller. That controller says, well, this is how I'm going to handle products when they're on sale. Like I don't know, I like shoes better. Well, now I said, wait a second, you know what, I want to show those same products, but I want to show them over here in a different way. I throw a different controller at it. Because remember, your controller just decorates your data. Not visually like in an HTML, but from a logic standpoint, from a representation standpoint. So your router is the one that should be handling, hey, I'm adding and I'm removing, I'm doing things. The controller is just what has to be gone through for the display of it. They can be heavier than that. And that's when you see them and you're like, wow, they seem pretty heavy. Why would you go here? And that's a weak spot in Ember documentation. They don't talk about this. When you start building a really big application, you want to be able to swap controllers in and out based off of something the user did. Well, wait a second, now my action just went. The moment I have to put the same action in two controllers, that tells me the lowest common denominator is the route. So you'll start and you'll think they go on the controllers, but you'll eventually wish they were on the routes. Can you say that better? Or?
No, I mean, stuff like
it's hard to explain.
If your action is just going to modify your model, and that's it, then you could probably think about putting it on the controller.
And you would be okay to do that.
Yeah. But if it's doing something bigger, yeah, put it on the route.
Yeah, the guide doesn't talk about it.
No, I've looked and looked and looked to figure out what's the rule of thumb on this, and so I never have found anything. So
But even if you put it on the controller, why couldn't you move it to the route?
You could, absolutely. Yep.
event bubbling, or is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Is
correct.
it goes up the routes. It doesn't when you're
Well, event bubbling is different, but this works the same way.
Okay.
Yes, the actions will bubble up as well.
The
They'll go
actions
through the
will
controller and then up to the route, and then the parent route, parent route, parent route,
Okay.
until you reach the
That's
application.
another reason if you're trying to architect this.
Yeah, because exactly, the idea is that I've got this thing, and if I want this controller to react differently, I can define the route there. So again, maybe by default, my application knows that I'm going to add to cart, and add to cart's the wrong thing. Maybe I'm going to display user data a default way. But if I'm using this controller to render it, it wants to do something different, it can define it there, and it stops. Drop in a different controller, it does something totally different. Drop in a third controller that didn't care, and it will bubble itself back up to here. Like, here's where things always end up unless you intercept them.
He could move this to the application route.
And it'll still work, right?
I understood that.
So they don't bubble up
They do
higher
bubble.
than the first place. So
If
it's
you,
not bubbling.
if you don't return true out of the first place it's defined, that's where the bubbling stops.
Okay.
But if you return true, then you can keep piling them on and say, hey, I reacted to it, somebody else can now too, and it'll just keep going and going and going. In your development mode, it will yell at you if nothing catches it, but that doesn't happen in production. Like once it's built, those errors don't occur. But in dev, it'll let you know, hey, something just threw an action and nothing caught it. But that might be okay. Like there's times where you're like, yep, that's fine. All right, so when we're over here, I've got my add to cart, and I'm going to click. Trust me, it's working. We're going to see it in a second. It's not erroring, so you know it's working. Like, we haven't done anything to actually see the cart yet, right? We've added it to the cart controller, but we don't have any interface to it yet. So that's the next part we're going to build
Something
out.
in your console to see it?
I could. I'm not going to, but I could. Yes. All right. So over here on my cart controller, I'm going to create another computed property. Same thing as before, right? It takes external input, does something with it, although it doesn't have to be external. The idea being, I'm going to create this function. I'm going to return. This .get. So content is a magic word inside of the controllers. It's just a, it's a proxy property to the model property, which is where your model is being set on the controller. So content refers to model. They're the same thing. They just proxy each other. And the model property is where your model gets set. So really, in this case, I'm thinking about it kind of old school. It's usually model. It used to just be content. Model is the correct, preferred way now. Go ahead.
You could just do it. This is the way control.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's good enough.
I'm not sure if model document for it, but
Yeah. So I was going to get the content and get the length off of it, but Matt's correct. Because it's an array control and it proxies all of that, I can actually just ask for the length property off of itself. Because it's an array controller, this is the length of the data that's set on the model property. Because ultimately, I want to know how many items I have, right, in my cart as I'm adding them. And I want to keep up with the count, right, every time that I add a new one. So in this particular case, there's a little bit more Ember magic of each, which says I'm going to watch each element in my array. So that way, when I add a new one, I can react to it. This is how it says watch the array as a concept. So if new things are added or removed, I can react to it as a whole. It's not saying if one of the properties changed on an item in my array. It's telling me if my array changed. That's what each does. You can drill down to specific properties and you can do all that kind of stuff. But that's what that does right there. It says watch the array for any changes, essentially to its length. Essentially. Has something been added? Has something been removed? If so, fire this function.
How is length not a property you can just, like, this seems like such a low level thing. How is length just not directly available in a template? Or?
It is.
Oh, okay.
He's just showing you.
Okay.
Yeah, you could.
It wouldn't be very semantically like, item count is more semantically like, if you see it in a template, you're like, oh, it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're correct. Yeah, there is a level there that, honestly, I didn't think of when I was writing it. Like, probably should have picked a different
Well, no,
example.
like now you've taught us this at symbol. I was just wondering, like, if this was
You are correct. Yes, because it is a property on the controller. Yeah, it would come across. It's available in the template.
Okay, cool.
Because that length is a controller property
Right.
against your model array. And so now that we did all of that, I'm going to, yes, okay. So I want to put this count in my application template, okay? I want it to transcend wherever I'm at, homepage, the products, the about us, whatever. So I need to go and put some stuff on my application controller to be able to access things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go create that application controller, because so far it's just been dynamically generated for me, right? So I'm going to create my array controller, but I only need it to be an object controller, because it's not going to hold anything, it's just some properties. So I'm going to create my array controller, or excuse me, my application controller. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my application controller. So we talked about the dependency injection, kind of, sort of, just as a rough concept. So this controller needs data from another controller, right? In order for the application controller to have data available to the template, it needs to get the item count from the cart. So I'm going to need the cart controller. And this is just Ember's way of resolving dependency injection, of being able to say, I need that this way, pull it across, that kind of thing. So now having to import, it's going to give you the actual live instance of that coming off of that container. So it knows how to do all that lookup automatically by itself. And then I'm going to create a property that I can use inside of my template called cart count. It could be, again, anything you want it to be. And I'm going to make it a computed property because I want to watch the count of the cart, right? So the cart updates itself whenever it changes, but I need this property to be bound to it as well because I need my template to update whenever this updates. So it updates, great, I update, my template updates. I'm creating this connection between them. But I'm not going to do it as a computed property. I'm going to just do this as an alias, just so you can see another little bit of Ember capability. So what I've done is I said, I want to create this property called cart count. I'm going to make it a computed alias. So I'm truly just creating an alias saying this property is equal to this. Controllers dot is how you access anything in the needs. So I'm going to need my cart controller, and then I'm going to grab the item count property off of it. So now everything's all wired together. Which if we go to our application template and put it in, you'll be able to see it all now. So I can come in here. Those are my links. I'm going to add a number of items in cart. Cart count. Page will refresh. I have 0. Why is it 0? Because that's the length of my cart array, correct? Mm-hmm. I'm going to start adding items to my cart. And look at the magic. Because this is the cart count property, that's a computed alias to the item count computed property on my cart. my application controller needed my cart controller. The cart controller is giving me back computed property that is its length. Every time I hit this add to cart, it was bubbling up to the product's action, saying I want to add this. This is great. I'm going to grab my cart controller, and I'm going to just push that product onto that array. Just keep pushing, pushing, pushing. So we tied it all together now.
So why do the needs have a square element?
Because it's an array. I can need more than one. I actually don't have to do the array there. If it's a single, I can just give it the string. But again, I don't want to go back and type more. I don't want to change it later if I need to add another one. I just always make it an array. I just get into that habit. That way I don't forget later. Other developers see it, and then so let's say another developer opens and sees a string and goes, well, I don't know how to need a second one. I understand what an array is. It's just, it's just those power tips. Okay, so now let's finish this off by putting our cart control so we can actually go see all the items that we added to our cart, which is easy enough. Let's go and create our, let's create a cart route without the word controller in front of it. All right. So now I've got a cart route. Let me go change this real quick. Now I want this whole thing to go to the cart route, which at the moment it won't because we don't have the cart route. Well, we do, but it's empty. It won't show anything. So we're just going to do this. Now let's go create the cart template real quick. All right. I'm going to, well, this one's good. Let's do this, cart. Let's go grab our product template. Okay. I'm just going to borrow this. Take that off. We don't need the add button. So now when we come back over here, we can add a cart, add a cart, add a cart, and let's throw one of these. We should have 3 of these and 1 of those. Now when we go look at our cart, we have 1, 2, 3 of those and 1 of those. The hardest part, granted I copy and pasted it, the hardest part of that entire cart right there was typing out your template. HTML and CSS is always the hardest part if you're doing it right. All right. So let's look at a few more little magic things, and then we're pretty much wrapped up at this point. So let's go to back to our application controller. Yes, I know my application controller. I'm going to create a cart total because I want to display up there also like how much is this order going to cost me as well. So again, you see, we're just doing the same pattern over and over. Like you've learned a majority of the patterns in Ember. There's a few more complicated ones, but this is it. It's just repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. All right, so we're going to do another Ember computed alias. Controllers, and a cart total. In our template out here, I'm going to say, put this in this, I'm going to say cart total, because I just wanted to show that.
You forgot an L.
I'm sorry?
In your cart, or your application, you forgot an L in the controllers.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you. That would help. Probably already is. All right, yes, okay. So what I'm saying is in this here, I want to be able to show the cart total. What's the cart total going to be? It's just another computed alias over to here. Oh yeah, okay, great. I got to go create that now. So let's go on our cart controller. And this is a better example for you, Greg, because now this isn't just length. Cart total. Oh, it gets better. First time I've used a map reduce function. All right, so I'm going to return a total. So in this particular case, I am getting my content. Because I'm an array controller, I inherited all those fancy things. One of those fancy things is the reduce function. So I'm going to use the reduce to calculate my total. should look familiar.
Yeah, short points.
Do I? Okay. Where?
After your race.
Very
One
low
line.
line.
Thank you. Okay, assuming this works, if not, I'm copy and pasting, so I don't have to troubleshoot it because I do have a working version. All right, so I want a cart total, right? So what I want to do is I want to loop through every product that's in my cart, and I want to sum its total price. And I want the total price because I want the price plus the tax. And we've already created a total price property, which is a computed property aggregating those two together already for us, right? So I don't need to recreate that logic. So I want to watch each element in my array, specifically the total price. So if price or tax gets updated somehow, and I know that's not necessarily a realistic, pattern. Like, again, how's that changing on your application? But the point is, if you change the price or you change the tax, it's going to trigger the total price to change. If the total price changes, that's going to trigger this to recalculate. And what's this doing? I'm just using some fancy, logic here to do a map reduce. It says go through each one of these. You start with 0 as your value. Go through and grab the total price, and just go through every one that's in there, and keep reducing until you have none left, and the total is your total price.
What's that character near the end of line 11?
Looks like a-
That is a closing bracket.
No,
Zero.
isn't it?
No, it's
not
zero.
The
This is
purple
0.
thing. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the reduce takes a starting value
Gotcha.
as its second argument.
From back here, it looked like the @ sign, and I was
Oh, sorry, no.
totally
Oh, I
confused.
guess I never asked. I guess we could have made that larger. It's too late now, but sorry.
Well, everything else was fine. It was just the purple.
All right, so now when we come out here, we're going to go back to products. You notice cart was empty because, again, we just refreshed the entire app. We had nothing in our cart. All right, so now we've got 0, 0, right? So if I click this, assuming I can do this math correctly, I would expect this to be $15.64. Oh, no, because total.
it's already added.
I need to drink. Yes, again, looking at the wrong field. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Don't trust users. All right, so again, as you see, as I start doing this, and we're going to fix that floating thing. That's the very next thing we're fixing. Again, not only am I getting my count, I'm getting my total price count of everything going on in my cart. And if I want to show you one more little thing of how to prove that that's all working correctly, let me grab this. And I can come out here, and if I change the tax of my, let me make sure I'm reading this right. If I change the tax of my first one, let's say I change it to $200, so you can see a big jump. I would expect us now to change to $314 and, blah, 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 blah.
It's not going to change the
No.
tax, that's displayed here though.
It's only the one on the cart.
Oh, yeah, I should have I'm sorry, thank you. See, you guys are paying attention. There we go. If I change the tax on this one that's in the cart, not my products, but my cart, I still would expect to see this jump to $314. And visually, this should change to $200, this should change to $214.49. And for the first time this evening, I actually have all the correct. Look at that.
Oh, so that's hitting every instance of that.
Yeah, in this particular case it was, because we didn't make a distinction between them, because they're the same model. Yeah, I didn't make that. There's more you can do with the dynamic. When I wrote this out, I only had 3 things in my cart, and I picked the right one.
Yeah.
Right. I
Quit
just,
looking at how the sausage is made.
no, I just expected each item in the cart to be a separate instance of the model. So I only expected this
No,
to be the
because-
first one.
Yeah, if you scroll down to one of the ones with the SKU of their taxes. update.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their tax is
Yeah.
still that. I just expected only one of that first SKU to update.
Yeah, it's because I got that object, but they're all the same instance of that object. I didn't.
You didn't clone the object.
Yeah, when I put it in, exactly. I didn't do it. Like I could have done it. Like I could have used item controllers in the template to give it a different context, so it would have been different. Or I could have. Yeah, I could have done it differently. Like cart. Yeah, you weren't supposed to see this because cart. When you start getting into this part of it, there's a few more things you have to solve
Yeah.
that go beyond just this generic button. You have some data concepts you have to tackle. You have the same thing with removing. If I put a remove button in here and remove one, it'll remove all instances of that one
Oh, okay.
from your cart, which is what you don't want. I mean, it's easy enough to do. It's just, yeah, we didn't go that far. All right, so that's cart total. That's that. Okay, so we can do the helper to fix this, and then that's the last thing. Okay. So let's go to here. Let's do a Ember generate. We're going to create a currency helper to help us format all that currency and the floating math and all that fun stuff. All right, helper currency. We'll come back to that. All right, so everywhere that I'm using the price right now, where I've got prices displaying, I'm going to tell it to do this, which is Handlebar's way of saying, I want you to run it through this helper. So it's going to use the currency helper to display price. It's going to use the currency helper to display tax. It's going to use the currency helper to display total price. So we're going to do that here. We're going to do that here on cart total. We're also going to go do it on our products template as well, because again, everywhere I'm doing prices, I want to do this. Okay. Then I'm going to go open up my helper.
Are you able to do anything like that with the model, so you don't have to update every view?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
I mean, you could do it one of two ways. I would just create a computed property. You know, like tax formatted, price formatted.
Okay.
Or you could write a custom, I want to do a little interesting. I would just do it as computed properties. We've gotten some fancy magic going on where we bring it in. All right, so we load the data in. And as the data comes in, we have a base model that we then loop through and get all the properties and run them through cleaners and then assign them to the object that actually is the one extending through a reopened class of the instance. So what you get is the property you're expecting, the way you're expecting, already formatted because we took care of it at a level you don't even see in the code. You can get really fancy. At first you're like, oh, it's magic. Like if I'm a developer and I'm just using this, what the hell? And then you use Ember for a while and you're like, screw it, there's so much magic going on. It's time for some of my own. You either okay with the magic or you're not going to use Ember. Because there's just a crap load of magic going on. Yeah. At first, I was kind of like I'm not a fan of that. And then I'm like, look how much stuff I don't have to write. I'm on board! And now I'm just like, whatever, if you don't want to read a manual, then I guess you're not going to work on my app. It's just trade-offs. But yeah, we have some really fancy magic going on in our models. So we don't have to recreate everything as a computer property.
Now, is this formatting stuff something that you could also, or would you ever do that in the controller?
Yeah, you can do it there too.
Okay, because the controller is decorating.
Off the model. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is more just a, hey, this is what a helper is.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because there's going to be times too where you're going to want your helper to have to talk to the controller to find out which locale it should format the currency in.
Yeah.
And if
like
you're doing that, then why not just do it on the controller? And why not have a mix in, which is another object that you can mix in its capabilities into this object, and with it is a currency mix in. And now it has three methods that are automatically available. It has an init that can say, go over all of my keys and just automatically format them for me. Or override the getters, that way when it gets called, do this. And yeah, there's 10 different ways you can solve that.
Okay.
This is the absolute simplest of simple, but it's not going to get you very far.
Sure.
It's specifically solving the currency problem.
Sure.
It just fit into the demo. But absolutely.
Love it.
So what helper is this?
This is a currency helper.
But
So
it's make handlebars dot.
yeah, so in order to make a handlebars helper in Ember, you have an Ember handlebars make bound helper. You want it to be bound so that way, if the property you're displaying gets changed somewhere, you want it to be able to change also. You can make an unbound helper, which is truly going to just render, it'll change the display however you want it to be displayed, but it's a one-time thing. You go change that data and it's not going to update. And the reason why they made those distinctions is because every observer adds a little bit of weight to your application. If you have things that just need to be formatted, I need to format this data a certain way, but I'm never going to react to it changing because the data is not going to change automatically, then why in a table of 1,000 rows am I going to have 1,000 listeners to something that is never going to change? Yeah. So instead, I would make an unbound helper so it truly doesn't add, doesn't have all that extra weight. That's on you. Like, you have to decide which one you want when. Ember can't decide for you. But there's those kinds of things where there's different types of things where you can also use an unbound in front of a variable name in your templates. Like we were saying, price and name, you can say unbound. That's a built-in helper that automatically gives you that unbound helper. But if you need your own special unbound logic, you can create an unbound helper to define that function. All right, so because we're using Ember CLI, like if you go read the manual about handlebar helpers work, there's a difference between how Ember uses them and Ember CLI uses them and how it resolves the names. Ember CLI wants you to have a dash in the name. So it would have had to be like display dash currency or change currency or show currency with dashes because its resolver expects a dash to be there.
You said CLI does, or?
Ember CLI expects that.
Okay.
But Ember does not. However, when we were digging around in the source code to confirm that we were telling you the correct thing, we found in the master branch of Ember that it looks like that might be changing. But we can't quite tell which direction they're changing it towards. So the point is, at this moment in time, don't get hung up on what I'm commenting out or how I'm making it work, because this is I'm making Ember CLI work like Ember works. So when you read the Ember manual, you'll see the code and go, oh, I remember seeing that code.
Gotcha.
But it won't work in Ember CLI that way unless you do what I'm about to do. The point of it is I want you to see that I can format the currency inside of the helper, and my template, I get what I want. This is one of those things where at the moment, those two tools, the framework and the tool, are in slight disagreement with each other.
Okay.
And it's all about automatic resolution. So when it looks in the template, it knows how to get there faster. Am I a property? Am I a template? Am I a component? Because components have dashes in their names also. So anyway, so that's why I'm doing what I'm about to do here, which is I'm yanking some of this. Oops, I'm yanking some of this stuff out. Because in this particular case, I don't want it to do its magic of creating it for me. I just want the function, and I'm going to do the creation somewhere else. That way I can bypass its expectation of maintenance standards for auto resolution. So again, don't get hung up on that part of it. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then I'm going to go to my app.js. And when I'm over here, this is that main file that's setting everything up. I'm going to import my currency helper from helpers currency. And then I'm going to do Ember handle bars, register helper. That looks familiar. I'm going to call it currency, and I'm going to give it that function. So now, what I would expect to have happen out here is, once it rebuilds, now I think it's because of the, just a moment.
I'm gonna have the
Oh, I got
path
it.
to that currency over on.
Do I?
Would it just be like just helpers?
No, you know what? That's what it is. Yeah. Let's see if the build yeah, it builds correct. Okay. So at the moment, if I go to products, I add some products. Well, nothing's different, but that's good, right? Nothing broke, because I didn't tell it to do anything. I told the helper, take in the value, return the value. I haven't done anything yet. This is what my helper is. Return the value. So I would expect that to be exactly what it is. So now what I can do is I can do this. And now we'll get some pretty math. Again, there's better places in a large application to do that.
Sure.
Like you should be doing it at the data, rounding correctly, blah, 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 blah. But again, for the sake of this RDR, for the sake of this demonstration, now I'm not getting my float math. That's all wonky because I'm formatting it. The number underneath is still wonky. The total price value and this total cart total or cart total is wonky. But the display of it is not because I just told it to fix it to 2 digits.
Plus he got a 0 following 1.5.
Yes, exactly. Correct. Because we use the currency helper everywhere that we were displaying a property. If I remove the currency helper from there, it'll be broke just on that. Because again, it's just a visual, helper. So that honestly went way longer than I was expecting. I apologize.
Oh, good.
Way longer. But I hope, that's the end. I hope that has given you a really good overview of the concept of Ember and how quickly, at the end of the day, we didn't write a lot of code. 80% of that was talking.
Can you share a version of this on GitHub?
Absolutely. Cool. I will get that link out. Probably not tonight, but I will get it tomorrow. Absolutely.
Good.
And we have 10 more minutes, but we can stay longer. We work here. So if you have any questions, feel free to say. But yes.
I have a.
Oh, I do have another slide, but go ahead.
I have an application I need to build. I wonder if this is practical or not, but I need to have some sort of dynamic templates where form fields are being built dynamically when the page loads. So the application, the Ember application is pre-compiled. Is that feasible?
Yeah, absolutely.
You
There
would,
is,
you would do it the same way that you're doing the list of objects or of products. Like you can put any code in there, right?
So if I render the actual HTML template on the page, I can use it live?
Yeah, you can create, so we have those view files. You can create views that are self-contained things. So you could say, this is going to be an input field. This view is an input field. And I'm going to have these types of properties, and I'm going to do stuff. And there's already built-in input fields. But you can say, here's my template. And you can have all these things. So in your code, you say, I want to use this thing, it knows how to render itself. So you could dynamically react to a list of configuration options and have pre-built, like you know what the reaction should be based off of I want this, this, and this. And so they were already pre-compiled and pre-built, and then you just do the arranging of them. And if you need those to dynamically build themselves, you can do that also because it's just properties at that point. You can say, I want this template to render, or excuse me, I want to render this template inside of me and that template, or I want to take these two things. You can reach in and actually get the template string and redo things with it, even though it's been compiled. Like you have access to all that. We just didn't touch on any of that.
I don't know if I explained the question correctly. What I mean is, let's say the page itself is being served with PHP, and each time there's a different set of form fields.
Right.
Is that what you're saying is applicable there?
oh, you're not creating the form fields with Ember. They're like already created on the page.
Right. That's what I mean. They will be different than each
Yeah,
page.
so your best approach at that point, off the top of my head, would be to run as part of the PHP serving of it, like the precompiled look at what the Ember handlebars precompiler logic's doing, do the same thing. So when your PHP renders, there could be those templates ready for the Ember application to consume.
Oh, because you mentioned they compile into a template array.
Correct.
So I can.
I mean, they're JavaScript functions and they have certain syntax, but as long as you replicate the end result of it, you could have a PHP generate it if you want.
I can have the PHP generate that JavaScript array where it said that
Well,
like,
you would
define. And
you put them in your own array. When the Ember application loads up, I would have an application initializer that says, I'm going to defer my readiness. I'm going to go reach out into the global namespace of my JavaScript, pick up this random array that I know is there for my PHP, take that, add it to my templates array inside of Ember. Now I'm going to advance my application readiness. So now when it goes, all those templates are available to me.
Great, that will work.
I mean, there's other ways, but that's just the one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Now, the hard part's going to be, you're going to have to recreate the creation of those, the compilation of those templates. You're going to have to recreate in PHP.
Yeah.
Call out to a node server that runs the Ember handlebars compiler, and you pull that back in, or you're going to have to look at the logic and say, this is what they expect. I'm going to write my own handlebars compiler in PHP. There might already be a library. I don't know.
Because basically from what I saw there, it showed at some point the template array.
Yes.
Was sort of like an array containing some, like a defined function. And
Yeah,
it had
it's a
some-
list of anonymous functions with a name.
And the templates were escaped.
Yeah.
So
And there's
yeah,
a few other little syntax things too. I mean, there's a little bit more that goes into it, but that's pretty much it, yes.
Yeah, I think it could work.
I think it's possible.
Mhm.
So real quick, this is another diagram that, I had one before that was a lot simpler. Same thing, it's just we added a few more things in. Now you can talk about the events, you can talk about the actions, all those things that we just added in the demo. And the slide deck will be up there too. And so anyway, you can see the needs between your controllers, your views, your templates, your routes. So again, it's everything we talked about. It just shows you, there's more lines on that graph than what we started with.
So when you're all done, what actually gets put up on the production server? Is it one HTML file and a huge JavaScript file? Or what?
Yeah. So the way EmberCLI gives you out of the box is you get an index or an HTML file. You get a vendor.js, which includes everything that's not your application. So if you load in Moment, you load in Bootstrap, jQuery, Ember, handlebars, all those things, and then you have a application.js, which is the name of it. So in this case, I called my demo, so you get a demo.js. And then if you have any style sheets in the style folder, those get compiled into a vendor and a demo CSS as well. And in your build, you can tell it what stuff to pull in and not for which environment. You have control over all that. But yeah, ultimately, the bare minimum, you're going to have 3 files. Index.html, a vendor.js, and your application.js. And then again, if you have images, you can add to that. That's the bare minimum. So takeaways, architecture and your applications are dictated by your routes and templates. Controllers are like decorators for your models. Routes are more like your traditional controllers in an application. Think long and hard before putting actions in your controllers, right?
Yeah.
Instead, put them on the lowest shareable route, but there's exceptions to every rule. Some resources, Ember.js, it's got some guides. They've also got a cookbook out there to discuss Ember.js. It's a great site to have conversations about Ember. And then that's where the Ember inspector is at, which I can show you for 15 seconds. And then we are finished. So here, if I go to this Ember tab, this will actually show you, like, here's all of the routes that are registered in this application. This is, yeah, I can, so these are our routes. We have the index route, we have the application route, we have the products route, card route. You got these two for free, the loading and error, we can talk about them, but you get the idea of what they do. We don't have any data, but if we were tied into like Ember data, you could then actually look at your actual models and all that kind of stuff. We just do it that way. Your view tree, so I can look at, like here, I can tell which template's doing what, and it's actually using the controller, it's bound by what things. It's immensely helpful when you're 20 levels deep into an application and you're like, I'm really not sure why I'm not getting the data I'm expecting to get here. You can come up here and be like, oh, because I don't have the controller on me, I thought I had. Oops, really easy. And nothing that we have built into here, you can actually look at the promises and inspect them. You don't get a lot of it out of this application, but if you start talking about JSON calls and stuff, you can actually walk inside, look at them. Ember Inspector is an awesome, awesome tool to help you debug and build your Ember applications, and also just to get used to them. Go to another website that's written in Ember, pull this up, and just see how they have it organized. You're not looking at the code, but you're looking at the structure of the application. So Ember Inspector is awesome. And that now is the
Thank you.
Awesome, great job.